Hi guys, tonight we ease ourselves into the kind of winter that does not simply settle in, but presses down from every direction until you feel it in your breath and in your bones. You picture yourself stepping out of a small wooden door and immediately sensing how December has wrapped its cold fingers around the entire landscape. The air stings against your cheeks sharper than you expect, and for a moment you probably will not survive this if you stay out too long without finding some kind of shelter. The ground feels hard and uneven under your boots, and each exhale looks like a drifting ribbon of fog in front of you. This is the kind of night people in the Middle Ages faced every year once the dark season arrived. Many of them watched the daylight shrink a little more each week until the afternoons looked like twilight and the mornings never seemed to fully brighten. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help set the atmosphere, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. You stand at the edge of a medieval village and the cold feels like a living presence. Winter is not only a temperature here, it is an event. It transforms how people work, how they sleep, what they eat, and even how they celebrate the most important holiday of the season. The darkness seems thicker than it does in warmer times of the year, and the quiet feels so deep that you can hear small movements coming from barns and houses you cannot yet see. A well-known historical fact is that winters during parts of the Middle Ages were harsher than what many regions experience today because of a climatic period that scholars often call the Little Ice Age. Temperatures dipped and seasons stretched longer. People felt trapped by storms and snow that lingered across fields and blocked trade routes. Yet they still had to find ways to survive, which meant preparing far earlier than you might imagine. As you step forward, the village begins to take shape. A few thatched roofs are edged with frost and you can see a thin trail of smoke escaping from one chimney. The cold travels easily through the gaps in wooden walls and stone floors. People relied on simple architecture and heavy fabrics to stay warm. Even then, they were not always successful. You can almost feel the draft sneaking past your shoulder, reminding you how fragile comfort can be here. Your boots sink into patches of frozen mud as you move between small houses. Inside these homes, families crowd near fireplaces that do their best to fill rooms with heat. You notice that the heat is not evenly spread. The space right beside the flame is warm, but just a few steps away your fingertips feel cold again. It is a quiet kind of struggle, the kind you repeat every day through the season. A quirky detail some historians note is that certain communities believe spirits wandered more freely in winter, which led people to keep embers alive at night, partly to discourage unwelcome visitors. You keep walking and notice how the silence deepens. The only sounds come from your boots and the faint creaking of frozen branches overhead. These trees look thin and ghostly in the moonlight. It makes you wonder how villagers judged the time. They looked to the sky, the angle of the moon, and the glow of distant fires. The arrival of December signalled more than a holiday. It meant that the hardest part of the year had begun. People knew that if they ran out of stored food, there would be little chance of replacing it. If their animals fell ill, the entire household suffered. Historians continue to debate how consistently people celebrated early Christmas traditions across different regions because records vary and local customs often blended with older rituals. Yet you can imagine how the emotional need for light and comfort grew stronger as the days darkened. The darker the night became, the more people leaned into rituals that gave meaning to the cold. You notice candles in a few windows glowing faintly through stretched parchment panes. Even the smallest spark feels important in a landscape like this. The wind picks up, and it carries the smell of smoke from several houses. You draw your cloak closer. Winter cloaks were not fashion statements. They were survival tools. Thick wool sometimes lined with fur protected travellers and villagers alike. You can feel how much weight rests on your shoulders as you imagine wearing one. Every movement feels slower, and every step takes more effort. It turns your walk through the village into something contemplative, almost like drifting through a dream. You approach a small open space where paths cross, and you see a few footprints frozen into the ground. They create a timeline of movement. Someone went toward the church earlier. Another path leads toward the forest edge, likely from someone checking traps or gathering what little firewood remained. The daily rhythm of life continues because it has to, no matter how cold it becomes. You stand there quietly for a moment, letting the cold settle around you. The night sky above looks almost weightless, in contrast to the heavy air that surrounds everything on the ground. Stars appear brighter in winter because the air is clearer and the landscape is darker. It gives you the impression that the sky is pulling you upward, away from the freezing world below. As you turn toward the nearest cottage, you feel a shift inside yourself. The cold is no longer a barrier, it is part of the story. You begin to understand how people found beauty even in the most difficult seasons. They saw the quiet as a gift, the darkness as a reminder to cherish light, and the harsh air as a teacher of resilience. Their holiday traditions grew out of necessity, but also out of hope. You walk toward that hope, now following the faint shimmer of torchlight near the next doorway. You step forward from the quiet cluster of cottages and make your way toward the open stretch that leads into the castle grounds. The air feels different here, sharper and heavier, as if the night itself is taking on weight. You place your hand near your mouth and breathe out slowly, watching the cloud of condensation drift upward before dissolving into the cold. It is strange how something as simple as your own breath becomes a visible part of the world in weather like this. Each exhale marks the boundary between what little warmth you carry and the vast chill around you. As you walk, the path beneath your boots changes texture. It becomes flatter and harder, and soon you notice a thin sheen of ice covering the ground. It almost glitters under the moonlight, beautiful at first glance but treacherous the moment you put your weight on it. You slide slightly and instinctively reach out for balance. This is the kind of terrain people in the Middle Ages dealt with for months at a time. A commonly accepted historical detail is that many villages lacked reliable gravel or cobbing on their paths, which made ice unavoidable during the coldest periods. You move along carefully, feeling how the cold seems to grip your ankles with every step. The edges of the frozen pathway crunch under your heels. The sound is delicate, almost musical, but it hides danger. If you imagine yourself as a villager carrying a bundle of firewood or a bucket of water, the risk becomes obvious. One misstep can ruin an entire week. A fall in weather like this can lead to a fracture or a deep bruise that never fully heals in a household with limited resources. People learn to navigate cautiously, to use staffs or to walk beside fences for support, especially during the dark mornings when you could barely see the ice waiting beneath the powdery snow. Ahead of you, the outer walls of the castle rise like dark silhouettes against the sky. Stone does not just cool in winter, it hoards cold. When you reach out to touch the nearest block, it feels like touching a piece of night, frozen into a solid form. You pull your hand back instinctively. The chill sinks into your fingertips too quickly. It makes you understand why tapestries and thick wall hangings were essential inside grand halls. They did not simply decorate spaces, they insulated them. One interesting trivia detail shared by some medieval chronicles is that certain castles hung heavy cloths soaked in herbal mixtures near doorways, partly to keep out drafts, and partly because people believed the scents discouraged illness. The gate stands open enough for you to step through. Inside the courtyard, the cold feels even more profound. The walls trap the air, creating pockets where frost clings stubbornly to every surface. Even the wooden beams above look glazed with a thin layer of frozen moisture. You rub your hands together, wishing for gloves that actually warm your skin instead of just shielding it. Medieval gloves existed made from wool or leather, but they were not always thick enough to offer real comfort in winters like this. You take a slow step across the courtyard and immediately feel a slight skid beneath your boot. The entire ground looks like it has been polished smooth by nature. People would scatter straw or rushes here during the worst nights to create some friction, yet the moment the wind picked up, or the straw froze into clumps, the danger returned. It turns the act of walking into a quiet negotiation with the ground. Every movement has intention behind it. Historians continue to debate how often castle courtyards were cleared or salted during winter. Evidence varies widely, and region to region practices differed. Some say salt was too valuable to waste on walkways except during emergencies. Others argue that certain estates use salt regularly in strategic spots. The uncertainty gives this place a sense of mystery. You look down and imagine different eras passing through this same yard, some safer than others, some far more treacherous. A gust of wind sweeps across the space and hits you full in the chest. It steals the breath from your lungs with surprising force. The cold is not a sensation now. It is an opponent. It pushes at your clothes and tries to slip past your neckline. You clutch your cloak tighter. Even layered wool lets the chill sink through slowly. You think about how medieval people prepared for outings by wearing multiple layers of linen under their heavier garments, partly because linen wickeded moisture away from the skin and helped keep the cold from penetrating too deeply. The sky above looks like polished iron. No warmth, no softness, only a hard silence that stretches to the horizon. The moonlight catches the frost along the battlements, giving everything a faint silver outline. Despite the beauty, your toes begin to feel numb. You wiggle them inside your boots, knowing that numbness was something medieval villagers feared deeply. Once you lose sensation, frostbite is not far behind. People warmed their feet by fireplaces, not just for comfort, but to avoid long-term damage. You take another step and your foot slides again. You steady yourself and imagine the guards who once patrolled this courtyard. Their routines did not pause for weather. If anything, winter demanded more vigilance. Slippery stones, frozen ladders, and stiff joints made the simplest movements risky. Yet tradition required that they remain watchful. A quirky detail found in a few surviving accounts is that some guards carried small pouches of warm ash to warm their hands during long winter watches. The ash retained heat surprisingly well for short periods. In the far corner of the courtyard, you see a trough frozen solid. The surface has cracked slightly, creating white veins across the ice. You brush your fingers over it and feel the coarse texture. Water, an everyday necessity, transforms into something difficult here. People would heat stones in their hearths and drop them into buckets to thaw the water enough for animals to drink. It is a simple solution, but effective, and a reminder of the constant negotiation between human needs and winter's demands. You pause and look around. Each doorway, each shadow, each breath of wind becomes part of the same cold story. The winter here does not simply happen. It shapes every decision, every chore, every quiet hour. You move through the courtyard, slowly letting the cold settle into your awareness, feeling how medieval life required patience, caution, and an almost stubborn determination to keep moving through environments that seemed built to trip you or chill you or send you back indoors. You take one final step toward the inner gate and feel the path beneath you becoming slightly less slick. It is a small relief. You inhale deeply, letting the cold air sting your lungs again. This is the world you move through now. A world where each corner hides frost, each stone holds cold, and each breath reminds you how close survival always feels. You step away from the icy courtyard and feel the instinctive pull toward the nearest place that promises warmth. It is almost funny how quickly your body craves fire in a winter landscape like this. Every breath of cold air reminds you how fragile comfort is and how vital even a small flame becomes. You move toward a side doorway that leads from the courtyard into one of the castle's service corridors. The moment you slip inside, the wind softens behind you, and you feel a slight change in temperature, subtle but noticeable after the piercing cold outside. The corridor walls are stone, and they hold onto the cold with surprising stubbornness. But there is something else here too, a faint orange shimmer ahead. You walk towards it and soon hear the steady crackling of burning wood. It feels like the first friendly sound you have heard all night. You let your shoulders relax slightly as you follow the glow deeper inside. People in the Middle Ages relied on hearths for almost everything. A widely accepted historical fact is that, for most households, the fireplace was not only a source of heat, it was also a place to cook, gather work, tell stories, and sometimes even sleep. You sense that truth now as you step toward a wide-arched opening and see a fire blazing inside a large hall. The flames move with slow grace, licking the air and throwing light across the room in warm ripples. The rush of heat hits you the moment you enter. It travels across your skin like a welcome hand. You walk closer, feeling your fingertips begin to tingle as warmth seeps back into them. The hearth dominates the hall, built deep into the wall and framed with heavy stones. Above it, smoke curls upward toward a vented opening that channels the fumes away. Even that system is imperfect, and you detect a faint smoky scent in the air. It is not unpleasant. It feels lived in, soft, familiar. A quirky little detail mentioned in a few medieval household records notes that some people believed keeping a small fire alive through the night protected the family from misfortune. The embers were not just practical, they were symbolic. Some families even had designated members who checked the coals before sleeping, making sure the glow never vanished completely. You imagine someone kneeling here centuries ago, using a metal hook to adjust the wood before stepping away in silence. The fire casts a golden light across the room, and you notice bundles of dried herbs hanging from beams above. Their shadows dance gently each time the flames shift. You walk near the hearth and stretch your hands out. The stones are warm, almost soothing, and you feel the pull of the fire like a magnet. In this moment, the need for heat outweighs any desire for movement. Your body simply wants to stay here, to soak in all the warmth it missed while you were outside. Historians still debate how evenly heat spread in medieval homes, because surviving structures vary widely. Some large halls warmed up effectively, others leaked warmth through countless small gaps. What you feel now is a reminder that heat in the Middle Ages was localized. People did not warm a whole house. They warmed themselves near the flames. You step back slightly and feel how quickly the warmth fades just a few paces away. It is as if you have crossed into another season entirely. A few benches sit near the hearth, worn smooth by years of use. You imagine families pressed together on them, sharing blankets while listening to stories or singing simple carols. Winter nights encouraged closeness. People huddled together, not only for comfort, but for pure survival. You picture children sitting with their feet inches from the fire, listening to adults talk about harvests, saints' animals, and distant rumours carried from one village to another by travellers who braved the cold. The room around you holds hints of everyday life. Clay pots sit on a table, a bucket of water rests near the wall, not too close to the fire, but close enough that it does not freeze solid. A woven basket contains smaller pieces of wood, ready to feed the flame. Everything feels purposeful in this environment. Nothing is wasted. Every object carries weight because every object helps you endure another day of cold. You draw in a deep breath and feel the warm air move through you like a calming tide. It makes you think of how people structured their evenings. Many went to sleep earlier in winter, not because they were tired, but because there was nothing left to do once the light faded. Firewood needed to be saved. Candles were precious. Darkness dictated the rhythm of life. Some families split their sleep into two segments, waking for a quiet hour in the middle of the night to talk softly or tend the fire before drifting back to rest. You kneel beside the hearth and touch the smooth stone near the edge. It is warm enough to soothe your skin. You imagine how cold fingers must have felt when pressed here at the end of a long day. You picture the way the firelight made shadows flicker across the faces of those sitting nearby. The glow would have been the only colour in a world dominated by winter blue and grey. Another gust of wind whispers outside, but you barely hear it now. The hall feels safe, cocooned around its fire. You let yourself settle into that sensation for a moment. It is easy to understand why medieval people considered the hearth the centre of the home. It was the place where life gathered, where warmth could be shared, where danger stayed outside and comfort remained inside. Every flame was a reminder of the boundary between survival and suffering. You stand up slowly, your body reluctant to leave the embrace of the fire. Yet you know this warmth cannot last forever. The night outside waits for you, and so does the rest of this story. You inhale the scent of smoke and herbs one last time, and turn toward the doorway, feeling the heat fade with each step you take. You leave the warm hall behind and step back into the corridor, where the chill returns with a quiet certainty. It slides along your sleeves and settles gently at your collar, as if reminding you that comfort is temporary here. You walk toward the village again, following a narrow passage that leads out through a postern gate. When you step into the night air, you feel the cold press against your skin with familiar insistence. The stars remain sharp, almost brittle, in the sky above, and the landscape seems touched by silver. Your path curves toward the village outskirts, where faint glimmers of torchlight move slowly between the trees. You listen closely. Soft footsteps crunch on frozen ground. The figures ahead carry bundles of greenery, their shapes outlined by the dim, flickering light. You move closer, and the smell reaches you first. Pine holly and a hint of earthy dampness rise from the bundles. It is a refreshing scent, strangely warm despite the temperature. Many researchers of medieval seasonal life point out that winter greenery held both symbolic and practical meaning for people of this era. These plants stayed vibrant even when everything else withered, so they became natural messengers of endurance. The villagers you watch now understand that deeply. Their movements are careful, almost reverent, as they arrange the branches across their shoulders. You join them on the path and observe their efforts. Some gather evergreen boughs from trees near the forest edge, snapping branches with practiced motions. Others carry holly, with bright red berries that shine like scattered embers in the torchlight. Ivy twists around their arms, in long dark ribbons. The greenery stands out against the bleak background, as if carrying a small promise of spring. While you walk among them, you notice an older man inspecting a holly branch with thoughtful attention. He runs his fingers along the leaves, avoiding the sharp tips. He murmurs something about choosing the right shape and colour. A curious detail mentioned in village folklore from several regions suggests that people believed the brightness of holly berries indicated the strength of protection offered to the household. Whether or not that is true, it explains the pride in his expression as he selects the fullest branch. The villagers continue toward the cluster of cottages, and you follow. Their boots leave deep impressions in the snow. A faint breeze drifts across the path and carries a mixture of scents from the forest behind you, fresh and cold at once. The greenery sways with every step, brushing against wool cloaks and rough linen sleeves. You approach the first cottage along the village lane. A woman emerges from the doorway, rubbing her hands together for warmth. She smiles as the greenery arrives. Without a word, she helps tie a thick wreath above her door, using twine and a steady hand. The wreath looks simple, but it feels powerful in its placement. Her movements suggest a ritual, even if she never says it out loud. A long-standing belief in rural households held that evergreen wreaths discouraged wandering spirits during the coldest nights, a belief that shaped many seasonal customs during midwinter. Inside the cottage, warm light flickers. You peek through the doorway and see a small group preparing a garland for the hearth. They place the greenery around the mantel with gentle care. One child presses a pine cone between two sprigs, smiling proudly. The air inside carries the scent of fresh resin mixing with wood smoke. It creates a comforting blend that settles deep in your senses. There is another layer to all of this. Some historians of medieval spirituality still discuss whether these evergreen traditions came from older winter rituals or developed later as Christian practices evolved. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Customs change slowly over centuries, shaped by memory, necessity, and quiet superstition. Watching these villagers, now you see how natural the mixture feels. Nothing about their movements suggests conflict between belief systems. Tradition simply lives side by side with belief, as easily as fire sits beside water. You continue walking as more villagers hang branches above their doors. They secure them with wooden pegs or woven fibres. Small clusters of greenery appear on windowsills and across beams inside homes. Each new placement adds colour to the otherwise pale winter world. You feel a shift in atmosphere. The lane looks brighter even though the torches have not changed. Green against white creates a sense of life returning. The villagers treat the plants with respect, but also with familiarity. They laugh at small mishaps like someone dropping a branch or tangling ivy around their own boots. These moments bring an unexpected warmth to the night. You realise how important community is during the cold season. Each person contributes to the ritual. Each person benefits from the shared sense of protection. A group of children gather near a low stone wall, weaving small circlets of twigs and evergreen strands. Their fingers move quickly, despite the cold. One child proudly holds up a lopsided ring and announces that it will hang above the chicken coop. You smile at the thought. A lesser-known note from rural accounts mentions that people sometimes decorated outbuildings with greenery, not only their homes. Whether for luck protection or simply habit, the practice shows how far the ritual extended. You move toward the communal well at the centre of the village. Evergreen branches have already been placed around the base. They soften the stark look of frozen stones and give the space a small hint of celebration. Villagers gather here briefly to warm their hands near a torch and take in the sight before continuing their work. Conversations float around you as gentle murmurs. No one speaks loudly. It feels like the night itself encourages quiet reflection. The deeper you go into the village, the more greenery you see. A long garland stretches from one beam to another across a narrow walkway. Someone added dried apples between the evergreen sprigs, their wrinkled skins catching the orange glow of torchlight. Another house displays a simple pattern of pine branches arranged into a triangle above the window. The shape resembles both a protective mark and a hint of celebration. As you continue, you feel the cold pressing at your cheeks again, but the sight of greenery everywhere softens the edge of winter. It feels less like a harsh season and more like a patient one. The plants add texture to the silence. They seem to whisper that endurance is possible. You stop near a final cottage at the end of the lane. A small family is arranging a long garland along the eaves. They tie it with knots, each one deliberate and careful. Above them, the sky stretches dark and steady. A faint halo of frost glitters around the edges of the roof. The contrast between the icy glow and the vibrant green feels almost magical. You take in the sight for a long moment. In the midst of winter's severity, this ritual brings colour, hope, and a sense of protection. It bridges generations' beliefs and the simple human desire to feel safe through the darkest nights. The greenery stands as a quiet shield, and the village as a whole seems to breathe easier once it is in place. You walk farther into the village and the gentle glow of evergreen decorations gives way to the dim but purposeful movement of people preparing for the longest night of the year. The air holds a different quality here, heavier with anticipation. You sense that something more than weather shapes the atmosphere. Families step in and out of their homes, with baskets, candles, and bits of cloth. Their movements feel slow and deliberate, as if they are participating in a quiet choreography that has been practiced for generations. The ground beneath your feet crunches softly. You pull your cloak tighter, not because the cold surprises you anymore, but because this part of the evening invites stillness. People treat the coming solstice with a kind of hushed respect. You can almost feel their breath blending with the frosty air each time they exhale. The sense of preparation is unmistakable. A detail, well supported by studies of medieval seasonal life, is that many communities treated the winter solstice as a turning point, both spiritually and practically. Even though official church celebrations focused on Christmas, rural traditions often acknowledged the long night itself as a moment that required careful attention. You see that idea reflected in the calm determination of every villager who passes you. A small group gathers near the centre of the village around a large wooden table. Lanterns flicker around them, casting pools of golden light across the snowy ground. You approach slowly and feel the warmth of the flame brush against your face. The group is sorting items brought from various homes, wax candles of different sizes, small bundles of dried herbs, bits of cloth for wicks, a bowl filled with grains, everything set out with neat precision. A curious note found in a handful of churchwardens' accounts from several regions mentions that some households brought out small bowls of grain on solstice, believing the act encouraged good fortune in the coming year. You watch as one woman pours a small handful into a cup, murmuring softly, her voice steady and rhythmic. Nearby, a few villagers kneel in the snow, arranging evergreen sprigs in a circular pattern on the ground. Their breath hangs above them like pale steam. The circle is not perfect, but it feels intentional. Children stand nearby holding lanterns, their eyes reflecting the warm glow. They whisper among themselves, their excitement soft and quiet. You notice how calm everyone remains. No rushing, no loud discussion. The night demands a gentle pace. Even the animals seem subdued. You hear only occasional low sounds from the nearby barns. They create the background rhythm of rural winter life, steady and grounding. You move closer to the group working on the candles. One man trims the tops of long tapers, making sure each wick sits at the correct height. A younger boy dips short candles into warm beeswax, repeating the motion patiently. The smell of warm wax drifts around you, sweet and earthy. It mixes with the scent of smoke from nearby torches. The combination creates a soothing atmosphere that settles your thoughts. Some medieval scholars still discuss whether solstice preparations like these were influenced by older pre-Christian customs or developed simply from practical winter practices that happened to align with seasonal symbolism. Whatever the origins, you can see how natural the blend feels. The villagers do not seem concerned with labels. They simply repeat traditions that feel right, traditions passed down through quiet winters long before your steps touch this snow. You follow a small group heading toward the church. They carry unlit candles wrapped in cloth to keep them dry. The church exterior stands solid and pale against the dark sky, its stone walls dusted with frost. The wooden door creaks open as the group approaches. You step inside with them. The interior glows softly from a few lanterns already burning. Shadows stretch along the walls, long and gentle. The scent of old wood and incense fills the space. You see a single candle placed near the altar, waiting to be lit once midnight arrives. A respected detail noted in monastic writings is that certain churches lit a central candle on the longest night to symbolize the return of growing daylight, a small but powerful gesture in a world defined by seasonal rhythms. The group sets their candles near the front. Their hands move slowly, reverently, as they prepare the space. Someone arranges evergreen branches near the altar. Another places a bowl of dried berries beside the candle. You watch the small additions transform the church from a cold structure into a place that feels more alive. You step back outside with the others. The cold greets you again, but you adjust quickly. The village now hums with a soft undercurrent of activity. People finish their tasks with patient care. Some tie cloth ribbons around the evergreen wreaths. Others prepare wooden boards for the evening meal. Smoke lifts lazily from chimneys curling upward, like thin silver threads. At the far end of the village, you see a group surrounding a low fire pit. They feed the flame with carefully chosen logs. The fire is small, just large enough to provide a gathering point. It casts a warm halo across the snow. People approach one by one, warming their hands and adding small offerings to the fire. Someone tosses a few dried leaves into the flame. Another adds a pinch of salt. An older man sets in a small carved token before stepping back with a thoughtful nod. An unusual record found in a few regional folktale collections suggests that some villagers believed the solstice fire could absorb misfortune from the fading year and release it as harmless smoke. Whether that belief held true beyond storytelling is difficult to say, but the calm expressions of the villagers hint at the comfort such rituals offered. Children run small errands for adults carrying bundles of straw or tiny pouches of spices. Their cheeks glow red from the cold, but they move with excitement. For them, tonight feels magical. Every flicker of torchlight, every soft chant, every evergreen garland is a small adventure. You walk deeper into the village one last time before night settles fully. The sky above darkens until it looks almost endless. Stars appear thickly scattered, their light crisp and steady. The cold deepens. You feel it push gently at your chest, a reminder of how important the coming rituals are to this community. The villagers gather in small clusters, talking quietly while preparing for the long hours ahead. Some will stay awake until the central candle in the church is lit. Others will keep watch near the fire pit or inside their homes. The night ties them together. You sense that the solstice is not just a moment in time, it is an anchor, a pause, a breath drawn deeply before turning toward the promise of returning daylight. As you walk toward the center of the village, the sounds soften. The wind grows still. You feel as if the night is holding itself steady, waiting. The villagers gathered with their greenery candles and quiet beliefs stand ready to face the deepest point of winter together. Morning arrives slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the sun itself hesitates to climb into such a cold sky. When you open your eyes to the first hint of grey light, the air inside the cottage feels still and heavy. You push aside a small wool cover and take a breath that feels sharp against your throat. Even indoors, the cold has a way of settling on your skin, like a thin, invisible frost. You wrap your cloak around your shoulders, and step outside into the brittle morning. The village looks muted at this hour. Snow rests like pale velvet across the rooftops, and the ground bears the smooth shimmer of ice that formed again overnight. Smoke begins rising from chimneys, drifting upward, in slow curls that seem almost too delicate for the harshness around you. In the distance you see movement. A few peasants are already walking toward the fields, tools in hand, their steps slow but determined. A detail often highlighted by scholars of medieval labour is that winter rarely provided true rest for rural families. Animals still needed tending, wood still needed cutting, and food stores required constant checking. You feel that truth immediately as you follow the workers down a narrow path lined with frost-covered hedges. Their boots leave clear impressions, each step a small commitment to keep the household functioning despite the biting cold. You walk alongside a group heading toward the animal pens. Their breath hangs in the air like drifting clouds. No one talks much in the early morning. The cold absorbs sound, turning each footstep into a muted crunch. When they reach the pens, the workers begin clearing ice from the troughs. One woman strikes the surface with a wooden mallet, breaking through the thick layer that formed overnight. The crack echoes sharply. It feels like the cold itself flinched. A memorable point, supported by estate management records, is that livestock survival often determined a household's survival. Cows, goats, and sheep represented not just food, but clothing trade and long-term stability. You watch as a man coaxes a sluggish cow toward fresh hay, murmuring encouragement through chapped lips. His hands move with practiced care. Even small mistakes during winter can lead to devastating consequences. You move on with the workers heading toward the forest edge to gather firewood. The path narrows as you enter the tree line. Frost coats every branch, turning the forest into a silent arrangement of white and grey. The villagers work efficiently, splitting logs, stacking wood, and clearing fallen branches. Their movements create small bursts of sound that echo strangely among the trees. You notice how the cold makes everything feel heavier. Each log seems denser, each tool harder to grip. A curious practice mentioned in a few lesser-known accounts describes villagers warming their axes by placing them near small embers before chopping wood. They believed heat prevented the metal from becoming brittle in extreme cold. Whether this technique was truly effective is uncertain, but watching the workers now, you can imagine why such habits formed. Every advantage matters when hands are numb and daylight is short. The forest smells of pine and damp earth trapped beneath frozen layers. The cold gives the air a purity that almost stings when you inhale deeply. You watch a young man gather kindling and tie it with twine. His fingers tremble slightly as he works. You feel a moment of sympathy. Gloves help, but even layered wool rarely shields completely against mornings like this. As the wood gathering continues, you hear the rhythmic scrape of metal against ice from farther up the path. A few villagers are clearing access routes between cottages. They use shovels to remove the worst patches of snow, pushing it aside into uneven piles. The task looks exhausting. Each shove sends small crystals drifting into the air. The wind catches them and turns them into brief glittering strands before they vanish. There is a sense of quiet endurance in everything you see. No one complains, no one pauses for long. People rarely had the luxury of slowing down during winter. Survival was an ongoing effort. Tasks lined up in an unspoken sequence. Feed the animals, chop wood, patch clothing, carry water, check stores, repair tools, then repeat. Some historians of medieval daily life continue to discuss how work routines may have varied between regions because climate conditions were far from uniform. In harsher northern territories, winter tasks took priority over almost every other responsibility. In milder areas, certain outdoor chores continued with fewer obstacles. You can imagine the range of experiences while watching the villagers here. Their world demands constant movement, constant awareness of the weather. As you follow a small group toward the riverbank, the cold intensifies again. The river is frozen near the edges, though a narrow line of moving water cuts through the ice in the center. Two men break small holes near the bank to draw water. They work quickly, using wooden buckets to scoop liquid before it freezes again. You notice how they lean close to the river, their breath blending with the rising mist. The morning light glints off the ice, like scattered glass. The air carries the faint scent of smoke from nearby fires. You hear the distant bleating of sheep, the creak of wooden wheels and the occasional clatter of tools. Each sound feels softened by the frost, wrapped gently before drifting into the stillness. You sense how much discipline winter demands. Every villager seems to understand their role. Tasks must be completed before daylight fades again. You walk with a woman returning from the forest with a bundle of branches. Her cheeks are red, and a few strands of hair escape from beneath her wool hood. She balances the wood, carefully shifting it so it sits comfortably across her arms. You offer to carry a piece, and she nods with a tired smile. The wood is rough and cold against your gloves. The weight reminds you how physically intense winter life was, even for those accustomed to it. When you reach her cottage, steam rises from a pot set near the hearth. She sets the wood down beside the wall, then kneels to tend the fire. You watch as flames strengthen their orange glow, filling the small room with renewed warmth. It feels like watching a heartbeat return to life. Fire is the center around which everything else revolves. Outside again, you notice several villagers repairing a fence near the edge of the village. They hammer wooden stakes into the frozen ground with impressive persistence. The cold makes the wood brittle and the soil resistant, but they keep working. Their breath forms thick clouds that drift upward, then vanish slowly. A rare but interesting mention in a medieval farming manual describes people using warm stones to soften frozen soil before repairs, a technique that seems surprisingly practical as you watch them struggle. You wonder whether this village uses such tricks or simply relies on strength and persistence. The sky brightens slightly as the morning progresses, though the sun remains hidden behind a thin veil of winter haze. You walk along a ridge overlooking the village and see smoke rising from many rooftops now. The village looks alive, busy, organized. Despite the cold, despite the ache in your fingers, you feel a subtle warmth inside, not from fire but from witnessing the determination woven into every task. The work may be repetitive, but it is steady and essential, forming the backbone of survival. You take a slow breath and let the cold fill your lungs again. The day is far from over, and winter never waits. The cold deepens as afternoon leans toward evening, and you feel it pressing at your sleeves again. Even after hours of activity, the winter air seems eager to creep through any opening in your clothing. You pause near a cottage doorway and adjust your cloak, pulling it closer around your shoulders. The wool feels thick but still allows threads of cold to slip through. It becomes clear why people in the Middle Ages paid careful attention to how they layered their garments. Clothing was more than comfort, it was strategy. You follow a group of villagers heading toward a small sheltered space at the edge of the village where fleeces and fabrics are stored. A woman carrying an armful of wool looks back at you and gestures gently for you to come closer. Her cheeks glow from a mixture of cold and exertion. When you step inside the storage shed, the scent of raw wool greets you warm and earthy. Bundles of wool hang from rafters, and folded garments sit stacked on wooden shelves. The room feels almost insulated from the piercing cold outside. Records from the period make it clear that clothing layers form the first and strongest barrier against winter. People often wore a linen shift closest to the skin because linen absorbed moisture and prevented sweat from turning icy against the body. Over that came wool garments of varying thickness designed to trap warm air and keep it where it mattered. You run your fingers along a folded tunic. The texture feels slightly rough, but undeniably warm. Inside the shed, a few villagers work on repairing garments. One man threads a large wooden needle through a torn seam, pulling the wool together with slow, careful motions. A child sits beside him, twisting strands of flax into something that resembles a thin cord. The task looks small, but you sense its importance. Clothing cannot fail in weather like this. Even a tiny tear can let cold sink in with uncomfortable persistence. A curious footnote in a regional chronicle describes how families sometimes soften stiff outer garments by rubbing them with lard before winter travel. Whether effective or not, you imagine how heavy and fragrant those coats must have been. The villagers here do not seem to be using that technique today, but the shelves hold several tunics with darkened patches that hint at older experiments. You watch a woman demonstrate how she dresses for long outdoor work. She lifts a linen chemise from a hook and lays it flat across a bench. Its fabric looks thin but strong, worn smooth by many winters. Over it, she places a woolen kirtle thicker and dyed a muted brown. The sleeves look snug enough to keep warmth close. Finally, she picks up a heavier overcoat woven from coarser fabric. When she holds it up, you can see the tight weave. Each thread seems determined to block the cold. As she explains her layering routine in simple gestures, you begin to understand how carefully each piece functions. Clothing in winter required balance. Too few layers meant freezing limbs. Too many layers made movement difficult and caused sweat to build, which then froze. Managing warmth became a matter of listening to the body's signals and adjusting throughout the day. Academic debate continues about how commonly fur-lined garments were used among rural communities. Some researchers argue that fur was too valuable for most peasants, while others suggest that localized hunting provided certain families with enough material to line at least a few essential items. Watching these villagers now, you notice only occasional fur trim along collars or hoods. Mostly, you see wool in various textures, the backbone of winter survival. Outside again, you see a young boy adjusting strips of cloth wrapped around his feet. He tucks the ends carefully into his boots. You kneel to take a closer look. The cloth strips act as insulation, trapping warmth while absorbing moisture that might seep in. A simple technique, but clever. His mother explains with a quick smile that she replaces the strips twice a day when temperatures fall below freezing. It keeps his feet warm enough to run errands without risking numbness. Farther up the path, a group of men prepare for a walk to a nearby woodland. They adjust their cloaks, fastening them at the shoulders with metal brooches. The cloaks hang long, brushing just above their boots. Their edges appear slightly stiff with frost, but the wool still looks thick enough to trap heat. One man pulls a hood over his head, and you notice how it falls low over his brow to shield his face from wind. A peculiar seasonal habit described in a single manuscript states that some villagers tucked small warmed stones into pouches inside their cloaks to radiate heat during long journeys. The note sounds almost playful, but it feels believable as you watch one of the men slip something heavy into his inner pocket. Whether another warmed stone rests there is a mystery, but his satisfied expression suggests he feels prepared. You continue walking and notice how villagers move their shoulders often to keep circulation flowing. Winter clothing restricts movement slightly. A thick tunic combined with an outer cloak creates weight that can tire you if you stand still too long. Many people shift their posture or stretch their arms to stay warm. You mimic their movements and feel heat build slowly through your shoulders and back. Near the marketplace, a woman sets out a spinning wheel. Her fingers work swiftly despite the cold. She draws out wool into long threads with remarkable steadiness. The air around her fills with tiny strands that drift like feathers until they settle on the snow. The contrast of pale fibre against icy ground looks delicate. You watch as she winds the thread with practiced rhythm. Many researchers describe how winter encouraged indoor textile work, but tasks like carding and spinning occasionally continued outdoors when daylight permitted. Another villager holds up a pair of mittens knitted with thick woven ridges. You take them for a moment, feeling the sturdy warmth in the palm. The thumb section looks slightly oversized, allowing for better handling of tools. Practicality shaped design, not aesthetics. Clothing had to survive tasks like chopping wood, carrying hay, or breaking ice. Beauty came second. Endurance came first. You walk past a cottage where a woman hangs damp tunics near the hearth inside. She checks each garment with a gentle press, ensuring it dries evenly. Moisture is a quiet enemy in winter. Even the warmest wool loses effectiveness when wet. You realize how carefully these people must guard every piece of clothing, repairing, reshaping, and rotating garments so that no one goes out with damp layers. The wind shifts suddenly, carrying a cold gust that grazes your face. You pull your scarf higher and feel the fabric protect your skin with a softness you had not appreciated before. Standing there wrapped in layers just as the villagers are, you sense the subtle confidence that comes with being properly dressed. Winter still bites at you, still sinks its teeth into your fingers, but now you feel ready to endure it. Across the village, families move about in their layered clothing, some heading toward the fields, others to the church or the well. Each person carries a small pocket of warmth inside their garments, built from knowledge passed through countless winters. Layer by layer, stitch by stitch, these clothes do more than protect. They reflect a world where survival is woven as carefully as the fabric itself. The daylight fades sooner than you expect, slipping away until only a faint blue glow lingers on the horizon. Evening settles across the village with a slow, deliberate quiet. As the final shimmer of sunlight disappears, you hear the distant groan of wind sliding across rooftops. People begin to drift indoors, preparing for long hours of darkness. You follow the path toward the small church at the center of the community, knowing that morning will bring one of the most familiar sounds of the season. The night passes in a gentle rhythm. Fires burn low inside cottages. The quiet feels almost complete. When you wake again, a grey haze covers the sky. Frost clings to the edges of the window like delicate feathers. The air feels cold enough that your breath seems heavier than usual the moment you inhale. You wrap your cloak around you and step outside where your boots meet a layer of freshly hardened snow. The village rests in stillness, but not for long. A low sound rises in the distance. At first it seems like the wind, then like metal striking the air. Gradually it becomes clear. The church bell has begun to ring. Its voice cuts through the icy dawn with a depth that feels older than anything around you. The tone vibrates along the frozen ground, echoing across rooftops and drifting into every narrow lane. Surviving documents strongly suggest that early morning bells held immense significance during the medieval Christmas season. They did more than mark time. They signalled unity, devotion, and a moment of shared warmth in a landscape that often felt unforgiving. You hear that message now in each slow toll of the bell. The sound does not hurry. It rises, stretches, and sinks into the cold air with calm authority. Villagers begin emerging from their homes in small groups. They walk with steady determination, hoods pulled low, hands tucked into sleeves. Every step sends a soft crunch upward. The bell continues its patient calling, and people follow its voice instinctively, as if tethered to it by memory. You join them, feeling the weight of the cold pressing at your cheeks, making your breath wobble in the morning air. The church stands ahead, its stone walls touched with pale frost. The bell tower rises above the roof like a sentinel. You look up and see a faint outline of the bell, swinging gently inside. The rope below it sways each time a villager pulls it. The movement is slow but powerful, and the bell responds with a deep tone that seems to ripple outward like a wave. A peculiar seasonal habit described in a single manuscript tells of villagers tapping their boots twice before entering church on especially cold mornings. The gesture was meant to shake off lingering bad luck along with snow. As you approach the church entrance, you notice a few people doing exactly that, a small rhythm passed through generations without needing explanation. The interior glows with candlelight, soft and steady. The heat from the candles is modest, but it creates a comforting illusion of warmth as you step inside. Shadows flicker on the stone walls. You hear hushed whispers as people settle onto benches, rubbing their hands together. Slowly, the cold begins to lift from their faces, replaced by a gentle sense of calm. Many researchers describe how winter services held particular emotional weight. Days were short, nights were long. Frost and illness lingered in every household. A bell calling people to gather meant something vital. It meant that no one faced winter alone. You sense that unity now as the villagers fill the small space with quiet presence. You sit near the back and listen as the bell's final echo fades into silence. For a moment, everything feels suspended. The candles flicker like small stars imprisoned in glass. The priest steps forward, wrapped in thick robes that seem to resist the cold with surprising success. He begins to speak, his voice low but clear. It expands softly through the nave, settling like warm fabric over the congregation. The scent of incense mixes with the cool air, creating a layered fragrance that reminds you of earth smoke and dried herbs. You inhale it slowly. It calms your senses and softens the tension in your chest. Outside, the frost continues to grip the village, but inside you feel something like gentle resilience building in the room. Interpretations vary widely concerning how universal early morning Christmas bells were in different regions. Some areas use bells only for major services, others rang them at dawn for several days leading up to the holiday. Looking around the church now, you sense that this community embraces the tradition eagerly. Their expressions carry a mixture of hope, fatigue, and determination. Winter demands effort, and rituals like these provide just enough encouragement to continue. Children sit beside their parents, bundled in wool cloaks that make them look like small padded bundles. Their eyes shine in the candlelight, sleepy but curious. The priest begins a short chant. The rhythm echoes off the stones, blending with the breath of the gathered crowd. The sound rises and falls gently, wrapping the entire room in a cradle of voices. When the service ends, no one rushes to leave. People linger near the door, exchanging quiet greetings with neighbours. They touch each other's shoulders, nod softly, or murmur blessings that carry warmth, even if the air around them remains cold. As you step outside again, the bell rings once more, a final note to mark the closing of the gathering. The cold morning greets you with a firmness that has not softened. But now the village feels different. The bell has worked its subtle magic. There is a shared spirit among the villagers, a sense of starting the day with purpose. Frost still covers the ground, but something inside the community glows faintly, like embers beneath snow. You take one more breath of the chilly air and follow the villagers back down the path. Their steps move with more confidence now. The bell's voice lingers in the air behind you, steady and comforting, guiding the day forward through winter's hardness. You follow a narrow path between cottages until the scent of drying grain and smoked meat drifts toward you. It guides your steps like a familiar thread. Soon you reach one of the small storage buildings that families rely on to carry them through the coldest months. The door creaks softly as a woman pushes it open. You step inside behind her. The interior feels colder than the outside air, but it holds a different kind of power. This space contains survival. Shelves line the walls, though some look noticeably emptier than others. A few sacks of grain sit tied shut. A cluster of onions hangs from the ceiling in twisted ropes. Barrels contain preserved vegetables sealed tightly against frost. You run your fingers lightly along the rough wooden edge of a shelf. Everything here must last until spring. Manuscript accounts from the time reveal that many households entered winter with far less food than modern people might expect. Harvests varied wildly by region, and even a single failed crop forced families into strict, sometimes painful rationing. You sense that reality now as the woman checks a sack with steady, practiced hands. She unties the top, looks inside, then closes it again with a measured breath. Every handful must be planned. A boy brings in a small pot filled with dried beans. His steps are careful as he hands it to his mother. She nods and places it on a shelf where similar pots rest. You notice how she arranges each one so she can track what remains. Winter demands precision. There is no room for waste. A surprising ritual appears in a fragment of winter folklore that describes families counting their stored beans aloud on the night before Christmas to invite good fortune. Whether the villagers here follow that tradition or not, you see the tenderness with which they handle their stores. It is not simply food, it is hope measured in small tangible amounts. You step back outside and follow another villager to a smokehouse near the edge of the village. When he opens the door, a wave of aromatic heat washes over your face. Strips of meat hang from wooden poles slowly drying as warm smoke curls around them. The scent feels rich and comforting, but also fragile. You know that even this supply is limited. Household inventories from the era confirm that preservation techniques varied depending on what resources were available. Smoking, pickling, salting, and drying all played roles. Some families preserved only enough meat for rare special meals. Others, especially in colder regions, stored more aggressively. You watch a man check each strip for firmness, running his thumb across the surface with a craftsman's attention. Back outside, the cold bites at your nose again. You follow a group heading toward a communal granary. They carry small wooden bowls, each filled with a modest amount of grain. You expect abundance, but when the granary door opens, the truth becomes clear. The supply looks thinner than you imagined. The villagers gather near the doorway and begin a soft discussion. Experts have not reached full agreement on how often communities pooled grain during winter, but plenty of historical references imply that mutual support was common. It ensured that no single household collapsed entirely. Watching the villagers now, you see how each measures their contribution with quiet fairness. They understand that collective survival outweighs individual comfort. You step closer and notice how each bowl represents a story. Some bowls hold more, others less. Yet everyone places their share with the same calm gesture. The granary master, an older man, with frost in his beard, examines the storage bins and murmurs softly when he thinks no one is listening. His expression suggests that careful rationing will be necessary in the coming weeks. You leave the granary and wander toward the marketplace. A few stalls remain open despite the cold. One offers dried apples, another sells a small basket of nuts. A vendor unwraps a bundle of herbs that survived autumn drying. Their scent lifts into the air like a brief reminder of warmer months. People approach cautiously, counting coins, weighing value. Most buy only a little. A woman next to you purchases 2 dried apples and holds them close to her chest as if they were precious jewels. You sense she plans to save them for a Christmas meal, a small luxury set aside to brighten a cold evening. Her smile, faint but sincere, tells you how meaningful even the simplest foods can be when winter takes so much. The wind shifts, and you hear a faint clang of metal. A man repairs a cooking pot outside his cottage, tapping the rim with a small hammer. Sparks fly briefly, then vanish in the snow. His movements are methodical, almost meditative. Tools and cookware must endure the entire season. A cracked pot could mean a ruined meal, and in winter, a ruined meal carries weight far beyond inconvenience. Farther along, you see children sorting root vegetables stored in a shallow pit lined with straw. They brush off frost and check for rot with surprising skill. Even the youngest villagers understand how delicate the supply chain becomes once winter settles. Their parents watch silently, offering gentle guidance when needed. The sky begins to dim earlier than you expect. Winter afternoons have a way of shrinking without warning. Shadows stretch across the village, and the cold intensifies. You walk toward a cottage where a family prepares their evening meal. Inside, a small pot simmers over the fire. Its contents look simple, but the scent is warm and comforting. Many researchers describe how winter meals relied on creativity. A little grain, a few dried vegetables, a handful of herbs. Nothing extravagant but nourishing. The mother stirs the pot slowly, her face glowing in firelight. She turns and offers a small taste on a wooden spoon. The flavour is earthy and honest, not rich but satisfying. You sense the pride she feels in making something modest feel special. As the family gathers to eat, their movements carry intention. Portions are measured, bites are savoured. They share quietly, knowing that each meal must last, each store must stretch. Yet there is no sadness here, only steadiness. They have faced winters before. They will face this one as well. You step outside again and inhale the cold air. The scent of smoke and simmered broth lingers faintly on your cloak. Above you, the sky begins to darken into a deep blue. Winter reminds you once more that survival is not a single decision, but 1,000 small choices, each handful of grain, each dried apple saved, each portion shared. Scarcity shapes every moment, but so does determination. The kitchen is alive with activity. The hearth dominates the room, flames curling high enough to heat both the air and the faces of those working nearby. A heavy pot hangs above the fire, its contents bubbling quietly. You hear the steady sound of a wooden spoon scraping against its sides. The cook, a woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows, moves with calm confidence as she stirs the mixture. The scent of herbs, onions, and something faintly sweet fills the room, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. Documentation from the era paints a clear picture that winter cooking relied heavily on whatever could survive long storage. Root vegetables, dried legumes, salted meats, and preserved fruits created a culinary world shaped by necessity rather than indulgence. You notice that everything in this kitchen fits that pattern. Bundles of dried thyme hang above the hearth. A basket of wrinkled apples sits on a table. A pot of coarse barley rests near the wall. These ingredients may appear simple, but the cook handles them with a kind of reverence. A boy kneels near the fire, adding small logs with delicate precision. Sparks drift upward each time he pushes a piece forward. The fire responds with a low roar. Heat fills the room, settling deep into your chest. The cold outside feels like a fading memory. Near the table, 2 women knead a mound of dough. Their hands move rhythmically, pressing and folding, as if the motion alone helps keep their fingers warm. The dough is thick and pale, flecked with bits of grain. When one woman sprinkles dried berries across its surface, the colour brightens the entire mound. The kitchen hums with the gentle sounds of preparation, each gesture measured and purposeful. Some medieval researchers raise questions regarding how often families prepared special Christmas dishes, since written records favour wealthier households. Yet here you see that even in modest homes, people set aside small treasures for these winter days. A pinch of spice, a sliver of preserved fruit, a little extra fat saved from autumn. Not enough to change their fortunes, but enough to mark the day. You step closer to the hearth and feel the heat prick against your cheeks. The cook pauses long enough to offer you a taste from the spoon she holds. The flavour surprises you. It is simple but rich, a mixture of barley onions and a tiny hint of smoked meat. The warmth spreads through your mouth and down your throat, like a promise of comfort. An odd mention, buried in a guild ledger, reports that some cooks believed adding the first snow of winter to a pot brought luck, provided the snow was caught before touching the ground. Whether anyone in this village follows such a tradition is hard to say, but the cook smiles knowingly when you ask about unusual practices. She does not admit to anything, yet her expression suggests a long memory of kitchen secrets. As the dough continues to rise, the boy near the fire begins preparing a spit for roasting a small piece of meat. The meat looks modest, perhaps a leftover cut, saved precisely for this occasion. He slides a metal rod through it and positions it near the flame. The fat sizzles immediately, creating a crackling sound that fills the kitchen with anticipation. The scent becomes richer, drifting into every corner of the room. The cook shifts her attention to a small clay pot simmering beside the fire. Inside, dried apples soften slowly in a bit of sweetened liquid. She lifts the lid and leans forward, inhaling deeply. Her face softens. She whispers something you cannot hear, a private acknowledgement of the rare luxury she is preparing. In winter, sweetness is more than flavour. It is a brief moment of joy. You walk toward another table where a young girl grates a hard loaf of stale bread into small crumbs. She moves with practiced skill, turning the bread into a mound of coarse powder. It will help thicken the stew or coat the roasted meat. Nothing goes to waste here. Every scrap becomes part of something larger. The kitchen grows warmer as more dishes take shape. Steam coats the windows, blurring the view outside. The cold may still dominate the world beyond the walls, but inside the kitchen, heat reigns. You hear laughter now, soft but bright, rising from the women at the dough table. Winter requires intense labour, but moments like these soften the sharp edges of the season. The cook begins forming small dumplings, dropping them carefully into the stew. They disappear beneath the surface, then rise again in slow, gentle swells. You feel a quiet peace settle over the room. The flames dance, the pot bubbles. The smell of herbs fills every breath you take. Interpretations among scholars diverge when considering how symbolic Christmas meals were for rural families. Some argue that food held deep spiritual meaning, while others believe families simply enjoyed what little abundance they could manage. Watching the villagers now, you suspect both perspectives hold pieces of the truth. Their movements carry both practicality and tenderness. When the roasted meat finishes cooking, the boy lifts it carefully and sets it on a wooden board. The kitchen fills with the soft crackle of cooling fat. The women place their risen dough over the hearth to bake, creating a flat, rustic bread that will serve as the centerpiece of the evening meal. As it cooks, the surface darkens to a warm brown, and the smell mingles with the stew in the pot. A lone scribble in the margin of an old psalter hints that families sometimes offered the first slice of bread to the youngest child as a symbol of protection for the coming year. You see a child waiting patiently near the hearth, eyes wide, as if sensing the importance of the moment before it even arrives. The kitchen becomes a gathering place. People drift inside, drawn by warmth and smell. They share small stories, exchange nods, and rest briefly before returning to their work. Winter may be harsh, but kitchens like this carve out spaces of gentle resilience. You step back toward the doorway. The heat clings to your cloak, refusing to leave immediately. When you step outside, the cold bites again, sharper now after the comfort of the hearth. But you carry the warmth in your chest, along with the memory of the meal taking shape behind you, a reminder that even in scarcity, celebration finds a way. Evening settles across the village with a softness that feels almost otherworldly. The sky takes on a muted violet tone just before darkness deepens, and the last hints of daylight dissolve behind the tree line. As night arrives, snow begins to fall in fine drifting flakes. They move slowly, as if they're reluctant to touch the ground. You step outside and feel the cold settle on your cheeks, like tiny crystals. The air is still. Even the wind seems to pause, respectful of the quiet unfolding across the village. You walk along a narrow lane bordered by cottages, whose roofs look powdered with fresh white. The snow creates a delicate hush, absorbing footsteps and muffling even the faintest sound. Your boots sink gently into the new layer, leaving crisp impressions behind. The world feels smaller, more intimate, wrapped in a blanket of silence that makes every movement feel deliberate. Lanterns glow from a few windows, casting gentle pools of golden light across the snow. You pause near one of the homes and watch the way the light ripples on the frost-covered glass. A shadow moves behind the window, then disappears again. You hear a faint murmur of voices inside, low and relaxed, carried by the warmth of the room behind those walls. The hush outside makes the sounds feel distant, softened into a soothing background hum. Contemporary accounts leave little doubt that winter evenings shaped communal rhythms in profound ways. People retreated indoors not only because of the cold, but because darkness pressed in early and stayed long. The narrow streets became passages of quiet reflection, places where the world felt smaller and time moved gently. You sense that truth now as you continue down the lane, listening to the soft crunch beneath your boots. Farther ahead, the lane curves slightly. You follow it until you reach a small square where a few villagers gather near a wooden post. A lantern hangs from it, swaying just enough to cast shifting shadows across the ground. The villagers speak softly, their voices rising and falling in barely audible tones. You do not approach too closely, wanting to preserve the delicate quiet of the moment. Instead, you walk along the edge of the square and let the lantern's light brush your face as you pass. A lantern tower stands near the church, its flame flickering weakly against the cold. You approach it and feel the faint heat reaching for you. Though the warmth is small, it provides enough comfort to pause and breathe deeply. The air tastes clean, crisp and lightly scented with distant chimney smoke. A seldom repeated fireside story from the region recounts how travellers claimed they could hear the quietest thoughts at night in snow-covered villages, as if the snow absorbed everything except intention. It sounds like superstition, yet as you stand in the near silence, you understand why such stories formed. The atmosphere encourages imagination, giving shape to things usually hidden. You continue walking, passing a cottage where a family sings softly inside. The sound escapes through the cracks in the doorway, a gentle melody that floats into the night. Voices overlap in a simple, earnest harmony. You cannot understand every word, but you feel the warmth behind them. The singing fades as you move on, blending into the wider quiet of the snow. The sky above has deepened to a rich midnight blue. Snowflakes drift in steady patterns, illuminated briefly when they pass through lantern light. You hold out your hand and catch one. It melts instantly, leaving a tiny spark of cold on your palm. The sensation is fleeting but calming. Historical researchers continue to analyze regional differences in how villagers used outdoor space during winter evenings. Some communities preferred total retreat indoors, while others maintained small gatherings and slow walks through the streets. Looking at the village around you now, it is clear that this community balances both. People stay near their hearths but also step outside to breathe the cold air, check on neighbours, or simply observe the peaceful beauty of the night. You walk toward the far end of the lane, where the village meets the edge of a small forest. The trees stand tall and silent, their branches holding small piles of snow that look like delicate sculptures. You hear the faint rustle of a bird settling deeper into its nest. Even the wildlife seems to move more quietly under winter's weight. From somewhere behind you, a group of children begin humming a tune. Their voices drift through the cold air, playful yet soft. You turn slightly and see them walking toward the church, each carrying a small lantern. The soft glow around them looks almost magical. A curious household charm, recorded by a wandering priest, claims that some families encourage their children to hum while walking through winter streets, so that wandering spirits would mistake them for friendly travellers. Whether or not anyone believes such things now, the children seem to enjoy the small ritual. Their humming continues until they vanish around a corner. The cottages lining the lane are simple, yet each looks like a guardian of warmth against the cold. Smoke drifts from chimneys in gentle wisps. You hear occasional bursts of soft laughter or the distant clatter of wooden bowls as families settle in for their evening meals. The air smells faintly of stewing vegetables and baked bread. You stop beside a wooden fence that borders a small animal pen. A pair of goats huddle together under a low shelter. Their breath rises in small plumes. One shifts its hooves, causing a faint rustle of hay. The sound feels amplified in the quiet. You smile, appreciating the simple life around you. A few steps farther, and the lane opens into a slightly wider space where a communal bench sits beneath an old tree. Snow gathers on its surface in a thin layer. You brush it away with your hand and sit for a moment, letting the cold seep through your cloak while your breath drifts upward in long, slow clouds. The night feels calm, steady, and almost timeless. Nearby, the church's bell rope sways slightly in the breeze, though the bell remains silent. Its long shadow stretches across the snow like a quiet reminder of the morning's call. Perhaps tomorrow it will ring again. For now, the silence remains uninterrupted. The peacefulness of the lane makes you aware of your own heartbeat, slow and steady. You feel as if the entire village breathes in unison, united by the cold, by the season, by the rituals that shape their days. The quiet fills you, leaving space for thoughts to settle gently. When you finally stand and continue walking, the snow crunches softly under your feet. The village remains enveloped in calm. Lanterns flicker, songs drift, voices fade, and winter wraps the streets in a silence that feels sacred, carrying you forward into the deeper night. You approach the church again as night settles deeper over the village, the sky thick with stars that glimmer above the frosted rooftops. The air feels colder now, sharper, in a way that makes each inhale feel almost crystalline. You pull your cloak closer and step toward the heavy wooden door. A ribbon of warm light trails from the small gap beneath it, faint but welcoming. You press your palm against the cold wood and push gently. Inside, warmth gathers like a quiet embrace. The church may not be truly warm by modern standards, but compared to the freezing air outside the interior, feels remarkably comforting. Rows of candles line the walls, in simple iron holders, their flames reflecting off the stone and casting a soft gold glow across the nave. Shadows dance along the arches, creating gentle patterns that shift as the candles flicker. You step forward slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the light. The scent of incense floats through the air, mixed with something faintly metallic from the chilled stone floor beneath your boots. You feel the warmth rising toward your face, the slight prickling sensation that comes whenever you enter a space protected from winter's bite. Archaeological traces uncovered in recent decades point toward the central role of church interiors as communal refuges during the coldest seasons. Even if they were not heated in the way modern buildings are, the collective body heat of worshippers combined with candle warmth created a shelter more comfortable than most cottages at night. You sense that now as you move further inside and notice families gathered quietly near the front. A small group kneels near a cluster of candles arranged around a carved wooden stand. Their breath remains visible in faint wisps, but their posture shows relief. It is clear that this space offers more than spiritual comfort. It brings physical ease too. The stone walls, though, still cool, hold less bite in here. You run your fingers along one of the pillars and feel the smoothness beneath the faint warmth of the candle flame. Near the front, a choir of 3 adults and 2 children prepares to sing. They stand wrapped in wool cloaks, their hoods lowered, but their shoulders still tense from the cold outside. When they begin, their voices rise gently through the nave. The sound carries upward, filling the arches with soft harmony. The notes drift around you like warm breath, easing the lingering frost from your spirit. Specialists continue to re-examine whether villages used additional heat sources during important holy evenings, such as placing small braziers near the back of the church. Some evidence suggests this occurred in wealthier parishes, while others claim it was impractical. Looking around now, you do not see any braziers here, but you do see dozens of candles clustered together in alcoves. Their combined glow makes the air shimmer, faintly turning the shadows gentle. You step toward the altar, where a few fresh evergreen branches have been arranged. They release a faint earthy scent that blends with the incense. The mixture feels calming, as if meant to soothe both cold bodies and worried minds. You reach out and touch one of the branches lightly. The needles bend beneath your fingertips, but do not break. Even in winter, the greenery feels alive. An unusual practical trick noted in an herbwife's notes explains that she once recommended placing tiny sprigs of rosemary behind candles during winter gatherings, believing the fragrance purified the air and strengthened the resolve of weary travellers. You notice that one of the candle stands here holds a few small herb sprigs tucked at its base. Whether intentional or coincidental, the scent rising from them adds a gentle freshness to the room. You take a seat on one of the long wooden benches. The wood feels slightly warm from the bodies that sat here earlier. You rest your hands on your knees and breathe slowly. The choir continues singing, and their voices weave with the crackling of candle wicks. The sound fills the air without overwhelming it, like a soft snowfall made of music. Around you, villagers settle into their places. Some close their eyes, absorbing the warmth and rhythm. Others clasp their hands tightly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in gratitude for this moment of peace. Winter strips away noise and distraction, leaving only the essentials. Here inside this church, the essentials feel enough. You glance upward toward the rafters. Dark beams stretch across the ceiling, partially hidden by shadows. You notice the faint glimmer of frost still clinging to some areas high above, where the candle heat cannot reach. The contrast between cold roof and warm nave creates a layered feeling, as if the church stands between two worlds, protecting its people from the harsher one outside. The priest steps forward, quietly, robes swaying as he moves. His voice begins to echo softly through the nave. The words blend with the lingering incense, creating a calm atmosphere. You do not focus on every line. Instead, you let the tones settle over you like a blanket. The low cadence, the soft pauses, the gentle gestures all form a slow rhythm that eases your thoughts. There remains a gap in understanding concerning how deeply Christmas rituals intertwined with local customs in remote villages. Some historians believe the church's influence gently reshaped older traditions, while others argue that rural communities preserved their unique winter practices regardless of official doctrine. In this space you see hints of both. Evergreen branches mingle with liturgical items. Candles glow beside woven ribbons. Tradition layers itself naturally without conflict. The choir begins a second piece, this one slower and more reflective. The melody carries through the nave like a warm tide. You feel the cold lifting from your shoulders under the weight of the music. A child sitting nearby drifts into a quiet slumberhead, resting on her mother's lap. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth seep deeper into your senses. The room feels peaceful, grounded and safe. Outside, winter continues its relentless work, freezing the land and darkening the sky. But here, within these glowing walls, a small refuge exists, a space where breath softens heart steady, and the cold pauses at the threshold. When you finally rise to your feet, the warmth lingers in your cloak. You take one last look at the candles and the evergreen decorations before stepping toward the door. A gentle silence fills the room, and the warmth drifts with you, carrying you into the deeper night. The night deepens, and a faint trail of warm light spills from the largest building near the center of the village. Curious, you step toward it. The wooden walls creak softly as winter wind presses against them, but inside you hear gentle voices and the shifting of feet on old floorboards. When you push open the door, a wave of warmth and cheerful anticipation washes over you. The air feels lively in a way that contrasts sharply with the calm of the church earlier. The hall is long and draughty, but someone has lined the gaps in the wooden walls with woven cloth to soften the chill. Candles rest in iron sconces, illuminating the room with a soft glow. Groups of villagers stand together, holding simple handmade props. Wooden staffs, roughly sewn cloths dyed in muted colours, little bundles of straw tied with twine. You realise you have walked into preparations for a nativity play, one of the few winter entertainments available to rural communities. If you examine the surviving winter accounts from local stewards, you will notice that villagers often devoted part of their scarce free time to religious storytelling during the Christmas season, not only for devotion, but to bring relief from the long nights. These early plays were not theatrical in the modern sense. They were humble, heartfelt expressions of community life. Watching the villagers now as they adjust their props and rehearse small gestures, you see how deeply rooted the practice is in shared experience. Children cluster near one corner of the hall, each holding a small piece of fabric tied around their shoulders. They whisper excitedly, glancing toward the adults. A few older villagers help straighten tunics, adjust head coverings, or quietly explain a line to someone still learning their part. The atmosphere feels warm, gentle and patient. Near the front, a man adjusts a wooden manger he has built from leftover planks. The structure wobbles slightly until he presses a wedge beneath one leg. He steps back with a satisfied nod. The manger looks simple, yet somehow perfect for what the villagers intend. People pause to admire it, their smiles softened by the warm glow around them. The play begins with a soft murmur as everyone finds their places. Voices quiet, movements settle, and one of the elders steps forward to narrate. His voice is steady and deep, rising through the hall and filling the wooden beams above. Children listen with earnest concentration, their breath visible each time they exhale in the still cool air. Travellers' recollections from deep winter roads contain a peculiar observation that some villages added small local flourishes to their nativity scenes, sometimes blending familiar rural imagery with biblical moments. As you watch the villagers now, you notice hints of that same custom. One shepherd carries a crook, much like those used in nearby fields. A child portraying an angel has feathers tied to her shoulders, their colour mismatched yet charming. The elements feel both devotional and personal, a reflection of life in this specific place. The elder continues narrating, and the actors move gently through their roles. The hall's draught creates tiny flickers in the candlelight, making the shadows of the performers dance across the walls. The effect gives the story a dreamlike quality, as if the room itself participates. You feel the warmth of the nearby fire pit against your back, and the cool whisper of winter through distant gaps in the planks. The two sensations mingling in a way that heightens the moment. Children portraying sheep gather near the manger, their movements playful but quiet. One tries to nibble on a handful of straw purely for fun, prompting a suppressed laugh from the audience. The elder pauses long enough for the amusement to settle, then continues the tale with patient rhythm. Researchers often reach conflicting conclusions once they examine how widespread these plays were in earlier centuries. Some argue they were common everywhere. Others believe they flourished primarily in regions where the church and local customs aligned seamlessly. Watching this performance, you sense that explanation hardly matters. What matters is the connection in the room, the shared breath, the strong desire to bring warmth to a cold season through storytelling. A young girl portraying Mary steps forward, her blue shawl slipping slightly from her shoulders. A woman in the audience quietly helps her adjust it before she continues. The audience watches with soft eyes. These small moments of care underline how deeply community life is woven into each gesture. Even the quiet becomes part of the performance. The boy portraying Joseph carries a lantern, its light illuminating his face as he kneels beside the wooden manger. He seems proud, though a bit nervous. When he glances toward the crowd, several adults nod encouragement. He smiles faintly, finding his grounding again. The choir from the church stands in the back, ready to sing between scenes. When they begin, their voices rise softly, filling the hall with simple harmonies that smooth the edges of the cold. The music flows like warm water, gently linking each moment of the play. One humorous scribble found in a fading household margin hints that villagers sometimes use leftover harvest costumes during nativity scenes, when proper clothing ran short. As you look at the actors now, you notice a few tunics that seem oddly patterned, perhaps relics of autumn festivities repurposed for winter storytelling. The mix of styles gives the performance surprising colour. The play continues at an unhurried pace, allowing each expression and gesture to unfold naturally. The hall's atmosphere is calm, steady, and filled with a kind of warmth that comes from communal participation rather than physical heat alone. People lean forward, drawn into the moment, their worries softened by the familiar story. When the final song ends, the hall stays silent for a breath before gentle applause rises. No one claps loudly. It is a warm, careful appreciation that matches the tone of the night. Children beam at the adults. The elders nod approvingly. Someone steps forward to offer warm cider in wooden cups. You step back toward the door, letting the sound fade behind you. As you push the door open, the cold night meets you again, crisp and vast. Yet something from inside stays with you, a sense of shared comfort that lingers like a small flame carried in your chest. When you step back into the cold, the warmth of the nativity hall still clings faintly to your skin, but the night air wastes no time reclaiming its territory. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you walk toward the quieter end of the village. Lanterns glow softly from doorways, casting golden halos onto the frosted ground. You notice that many cottages display small bundles of greenery or simple woven decorations hung carefully near the door frames. Though modest, they seem to hold deep meaning for those who place them there. As you wander, you hear a soft knock from inside one cottage, followed by low voices. Curious, you approach and glance through a narrow gap in the wooden shutters. A family gathers around a table, illuminated by a single candle. In the center of the table rests a small assortment of handmade objects: a carved wooden spoon, a woolen doll, a simple ring woven from colored thread. You quickly understand that these items are gifts each crafted with care rather than bought with coin. Looking at what merchants recorded during cold seasons, it becomes apparent that most rural families relied on homemade creations as tokens of affection, since trade slowed drastically during winter and few had excess money to spend. The gifts were chosen not for extravagance but for meaning, each item representing time, effort, or a personal connection. Inside the cottage, the father places a small bundle of dried herbs into his wife's hands. She smiles, recognizing the value of something that might seem ordinary to an outsider. In a world where winter strips resources to their bare minimum, even a fragrant sprig gathered during warmer months feels precious. Their children wait patiently for their own moments. The boy receives a carved whistle shaped like a bird. The girl receives a soft cloth pouch embroidered with a single star. They hold their treasures gently, as if the objects carry warmth of their own. Some interpretations circle this topic without landing on agreement, especially when considering how early Christian teachings influenced gift traditions. Certain scholars argue that charity lay at the heart of these customs, while others point to symbolic gestures derived from older seasonal practices. Watching the family now, you sense that both threads might be woven together, forming something uniquely suited to the village's needs. As you continue walking, you peek into another home where neighbours have gathered. A young woman hands an elderly man a pair of woolen socks she knitted during the long evenings of early winter. He laughs softly, placing them immediately near the fire to warm. In exchange, he gives her a small token carved from antler, its smooth surface polished to a gentle sheen. Even the smallest exchange carries weight-building bonds that help everyone weather the harsh season. A winter anecdote whispered through older generations mentions that in some villages, children would leave tiny baskets outside their door, filled with kernels of grain, as offerings to wandering travellers or animals in need. The belief held that generosity during the darkest nights ensured fortune later. You notice a few baskets like this placed along a low fence near the road. Snow gathers around them, but the grain inside remains untouched, at least for now. You stop near the communal well and see a woman tying a thin ribbon of woven wool around the handle of a bucket. She explains with a gentle smile that each ribbon represents a promise made earlier in the year, fulfilled before winter's end. These small markers serve as reminders of kindness, exchanged between neighbours. The well becomes more than a place to draw water. It becomes a symbol of shared responsibility. Farther along, a small group gathers near the entrance of the church. They carry baskets filled with modest food items: dried beans, broken pieces of bread, a few winter apples. These baskets are destined for families struggling the most. You watch as they quietly sort the contents and distribute them with deliberate fairness. No ceremony, no announcement, just quiet generosity. Clues preserved in seasonal ledgers reveal an unexpected detail about such practices. Communities sometimes tracked who received gifts of grain or preserved meat, not to judge them, but to ensure support flowed evenly throughout harsh months. You sense that here too people remember each household's needs without speaking of them out loud. A few children walk past you carrying small sticks wrapped with cloth. You ask a nearby elder about them, and she chuckles softly. These, she says, are tokens meant to be exchanged the next morning during a simple game of giving. Whoever receives a stick is meant to replace it with something meaningful, even if small. A piece of fruit, a hand-drawn symbol, a wool thread. The purpose is not material value, but teaching children that giving carries more joy than receiving. Surviving testimony leaves several holes, prompting further investigation into how often gift-giving extended beyond immediate families. Some experts believe it was rare in poorer villages, while others compile evidence showing widespread communal exchange. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, shaped by local custom and available resources. You watch as families open their doors to neighbours, inviting them in to share warmth and conversation. Sometimes a visitor leaves behind a token, a button carved from wood, a small scrap of patterned cloth, a tiny candle meant to last one evening. These gifts may appear minor, but in a season defined by scarcity, their emotional weight feels substantial. As you approach one particularly small cottage, a soft glow illuminates the snow around it. Inside, an older woman sits at a table, weaving a length of rough wool yarn. She stops long enough to place the finished piece into a small pouch. With care, she sets the pouch inside a wooden box, decorated with a faint painted pattern. It is meant for her granddaughter. She explains a sign of protection for the coming year. She touches the box lightly, her eyes warm, despite the cold air slipping from the open window. A humorous scribble found in a fading household margin hints that some villagers believed giving a gift made after midnight brought twice the luck. Whether tradition or superstition, you see a few people still awake, working under dim lantern light as the hours grow late. Their hands move steadily, not hurried, as if the making itself is a kind of blessing. You step back into the street and breathe deeply. Snowflakes float gently around you, settling onto your cloak with soft, fleeting kisses of cold. The village remains quiet, but now you sense something more beneath the silence. Kindness moves through these homes, like an invisible thread, linking families and neighbours in subtle acts of love and remembrance. The cold remains relentless, yet generosity blossoms here, shaped not by wealth but by intention. Each gift, each shared item, each quiet gesture becomes a spark against the long winter night. And as you walk onward, those sparks seem to glimmer around you, warming the air in ways that defy the season. You leave the quiet village lane behind and follow a narrow path that climbs toward the castle. The snow deepens as you ascend, crunching beneath your boots in soft rhythmic pulses. Lanterns fixed along the outer wall glow in steady circles of gold, illuminating the frost that clings to the stones. When you reach the heavy doors, 2 guards nod and push them open with measured effort. You step into a gust of warm air that rushes over your face like a welcoming wave. The interior of the great hall stretches out before you in a sweep of firelight and shadow. Massive hearths blaze along both walls, filling the room with a heat so strong that your cloak begins to soften immediately. Long tables run the length of the hall, covered in woven cloths and laden with dishes that shimmer in the glow of countless candles. Servants move swiftly between benches, placing plates and adjusting wooden trenchers with polished efficiency. If you sift through the more detailed estate documents that survive from wealthier households, you find repeated references to winter feasts as vital displays of abundance and status. Aristocrats knew that generosity during harsh months reinforced loyalty, and these gatherings served as both celebration and subtle performance. Looking around the hall now, you see that every choice, from the size of the fire to the arrangement of the dishes, is meant to convey power wrapped in hospitality. Nobles sit near the upper tables, wrapped in finely woven wool and trimmed fur. Their garments shimmer faintly in the light coloured with dyes far richer than anything seen in the village below. Deep greens, warm reds, soft golds. The hues glow like jewels beneath the fire's dance. A tall man at the head table lifts a cup of spiced wine, its fragrant steam swirling upward, carrying hints of cinnamon and warmed fruit. The hall fills quickly with sound. Laughter, footsteps, the clatter of wooden cups, the melodic hum of a stringed instrument played near the hearth. Musicians sit on low stools, plucking slow harmonies that float through the room like drifting threads. The notes wrap around conversations, giving the entire gathering a soft undercurrent of warmth. Researchers studying the period still ponder how much of these feasts represented genuine celebration and how much served strictly political aims. The surviving accounts rarely separate joy from strategy. Watching the nobles now, you suspect the line between the two was often blurred. Cheerfulness fills their faces, yet their eyes flicker over the room with keen awareness of who sits where and who speaks to whom. Your attention drifts to the food arranged along the central tables. Roasted meats rest on wooden boards, steam rising in ribbons. Bowls of thick winter stew stand beside smaller dishes of dried apples soaked in spiced wine. There are loaves of bread baked earlier in the day, their crusts copper-coloured and dusted lightly with coarse salt. You notice a plate of soft cheese shaped into round mounds, likely made during the last warmer months and saved for this occasion. One playful superstition, recalled only in a single village memory near the region, suggests that nobles sometimes placed a sprig of evergreen beneath the main dish to ensure the coming year's prosperity. As you look closer, you see tiny green needles tucked discreetly beneath one of the platters. Whether the cook placed them intentionally or simply used the branch as a stabilizer is unclear, but the imagery fits the atmosphere perfectly. Servants bring additional plates, moving gracefully despite the rush of activity. They refill cups, distribute trenchers, and sweep up crumbs near the benches. Their movements appear practiced, almost choreographed, part of a long tradition of managing these grand rooms. In return for their service, they too will receive portions of the feast once the nobles finish a custom that reinforces the communal aspect of celebration. Near the centre of the hall, a noblewoman lifts a cup and calls for a toast. Her voice rises clearly above the hum. People raise their cups in response, and the hall echoes with the collective gesture. The wine glows ruby in the candlelight. The aroma wafts past you as people drink, a scent of warmth that seems to gather in your lungs. Even though you do not lift a cup of your own, the atmosphere absorbs you, filling you with its festive energy. A group of musicians begins a livelier tune. Lutes and small drums create a rhythm that prompts several guests to step into the open space at the centre of the hall. Their movements are graceful, but not overly formal. Winter feasts allowed space for loosened etiquette moments when noble and servant alike could relax slightly. You watch as pairs turn in slow circles, their cloaks brushing lightly across the floor. Surviving correspondence from long-forgotten estate stewards comments on how winter celebrations often consumed significant resources, sometimes stretching noble budgets precariously. Yet hosts continued the tradition year after year, likely because the display of generosity acted as a binding force among retainers, guests, and neighbouring households. Even now you can see how the warmth of the hall and the abundance of the feast smooth the sharp edges of winter. A servant approaches carrying a platter of sugared nuts. She sets it on a nearby table and smiles politely before slipping back into the flow of the room. You reach for one of the nuts and taste it. The sugar crunches softly, releasing a flavour that feels both sweet and smoky. Such treats were considered rare indulgences, often reserved for special days like this. At the head table, the nobleman gestures for the storyteller to approach. An elderly man steps forward, leaning slightly on a carved staff. His eyes shine brightly beneath the shifting candlelight. When he begins to speak, the room quiets. His voice carries a practiced rhythm that draws every person toward him. He tells of past winters of hunts in deep snow, of travellers who braved the frozen rivers, of unexpected blessings discovered when all hope seemed thin. A strange household charm described in a forgotten winter tale recounts that storytellers who carried a carved staff blessed the room merely by tapping it upon the floor before beginning. Whether this tradition has any genuine power is unknown, but you watch closely as the storyteller taps his staff twice. The room seems to settle deeper into the moment, as though the hall itself holds its breath to listen. Plates empty, slowly. Cups refill often. Laughter drifts upward toward the rafters, where shadows twist across the beams. The warmth from the hearths grows stronger, reaching even the far corners of the hall. You sense camaraderie rising, like heat filling every space between the wooden pillars. Eventually, the feast softens into quieter conversation. People lean closer, speaking in gentle tones. The firelight flickers more slowly now, softened by the hours. Some lean back against the benches, full and content. Others still nibble at the remains of the bread or sip the last drops from their cups. You step away from the central tables to take in the entire hall. The scene feels almost timeless. This blend of warmth, food, storytelling, and subtle politics has likely repeated itself for generations. Outside, winter rages with cold and dark. Inside the hall, hold strong against it, built not only of stone, but of tradition and shared comfort. As you leave through the great doors, the heat slips from your cloak, and winter rushes toward you again. Yet you walk with the lingering glow of the celebration, carrying its warmth into the cold night. You leave the castle's grand hall behind, stepping once again into the stillness of the winter night. The warmth fades quickly from your cloak, replaced almost immediately by the sharp breath of cold sliding across your face. You walk downhill toward the village, guided by scattered lanterns flickering against the dark. The snow beneath your feet crunches in a soft, weary rhythm. Ahead you see a cluster of more modest homes, built from rough timber, their roofs sagging slightly under the weight of frost. These are the places where winter presses hardest. You approach one of the cottages and knock gently. The door opens with a stiff groan, releasing a thin ribbon of heat. A woman beckons you inside with a tired smile. The room is small, far smaller than the kitchens or halls you visited earlier. The entire household seems compressed into a single space, with beds pushed tightly against the walls and bundles of clothing piled near the hearth. The air carries the scent of smoke, damp wool, and something faintly sweet from a pot simmering over the fire. A note buried in a 13th century muster list reveals that poorer families often spent the majority of winter indoors, performing small tasks beside the hearth to conserve warmth and energy. Seeing this room, you understand why. The hearth is small, and the fire even smaller, barely enough to warm the immediate area, yet the family gathers around it with a sense of practiced resilience. They sit close knees, tucked hands, extended cautiously toward the flames. The woman stirs the pot with a wooden spoon, worn smooth from years of use. The mixture inside looks thin but fragrant, probably a combination of dried roots and the last remnants of autumn herbs. A young boy sits nearby, shaping bits of old cloth into small pads. When you ask quietly what he's making, his mother explains that they place the cloth pads into shoes to trap warmth and keep dampness from chilling their feet. Even the smallest scraps hold potential here. Across the room, an older man repairs a cracked stool using a heated iron pin and twine. Sparks jump each time the pin meets the wood, casting tiny bursts of light across the dim interior. The man does not pause. His fingers move steadily, shaped by decades of necessity. Winters do not forgive broken furniture or poorly sealed walls. Everything must work. Everything must last. Interpretations drift apart when scholars attempt to connect these practices to earlier customs, especially regarding how families balanced practical needs with symbolic winter rituals. Some believe that rituals diminished entirely in poorer homes during harsh years, while others argue that even modest gestures held quiet spiritual meaning. Watching this family, you sense that survival and tradition coexist not as competing forces, but as parallel instincts shaped by the same cold. The pot bubbles softly, and the mother ladles a bit into wooden bowls. The children gather quickly, though no one begins eating until she nods. Portions are small, thin, and carefully measured. The warmth of the stew rises in faint curls of steam, filling the air with a comfort far greater than the bowl's contents. They eat slowly, savouring not the flavour, but the heat. One oddly specific belief recorded in the travel notes of a wandering tinker states that some poor households saved the first wisp of steam rising from their winter stew, letting it drift toward the rafters, as an invitation for good fortune to settle above them. As you watch, the mother glances upward briefly during the meal, her gaze following the steam for a heartbeat. Perhaps remembrance, perhaps habit, perhaps hope. You notice bundles of cloth stuffed into cracks along the walls. A girl reaches over to adjust one when a cold draft creeps through a gap in the wood. She presses the cloth in firmly with both hands, then nods with satisfaction when the airflow stops. Ingenuity becomes a constant companion in homes like this. People learn to read the winter air the way others read letters. A father sits sharpening a small knife, using a stone no bigger than his palm. The blade reflects a faint glimmer of firelight. He explains that the knife must be ready for tasks tomorrow. Cutting icy rope, shaving bits of kindling, preparing food. In winter, a dull blade becomes a threat, not a tool. Every item in the household must maintain usefulness, and each member plays a role in keeping things functional. The family invites you to sit near the fire. You lower yourself onto a rough woven mat beside them. The warmth is faint but steady, reaching your hands after a few moments. The fire pops occasionally, sending tiny sparks upward. The hearthstones hold stories. In their darkened surfaces, each burn mark a memory of a past winter that someone endured with similar resolve. In a corner of the room, a small basket holds a few winter apples, shriveled but still edible. The mother lifts one, carefully slices it into thin pieces, and shares it among the children. The slices are small, yet the children treat them with delight, savouring each bite. Scarcity gives value to everything, even fruit that once seemed ordinary. Gaps in the surviving testimony leave room for sharply different reconstructions of how poor families prioritised their winter tasks. Some accounts portray strict systems of labour, even within the household, while others suggest a more fluid approach shaped by changing conditions. Here you see an organic rhythm, each person shifting naturally between roles depending on the immediate need. A faint humming begins near the hearth. The oldest daughter sings a tune under her breath, a melody slow and stretched like a lullaby worn thin by years. The others join softly. Their voices blend with the crackling fire, creating a fragile harmony that fills the room with warmth more lasting than the flames themselves. As you sit among them, you feel the profound intimacy of shared effort. Every action, every repair, every stirring of the pot carries meaning. This is winter at its most honest. No grandeur, no feasts, only determination, shaped by necessity and softened by moments of quiet togetherness. When you rise to leave, the family offers you a humble farewell, their faces glowing in the fire's pale light. You step back into the night, the cold biting again. Yet the warmth from their small hearth stays with you, a memory of resilience woven into the winter air. The wind rises as you leave the cramped warmth of the cottage behind. Snow shifts in gentle spirals across the open ground, lifted by long cold breaths of air that sweep down from the hills. You tighten your cloak, pull your hood low, and step into the deeper drifts at the village's edge. The sky above glows with the faintest suggestion of moonlight behind thick grey clouds, enough to reveal the shifting landscape, but not enough to promise comfort. Tonight, you will follow the same frozen roads that travellers once braved in order to reach neighbouring villages, churches, and distant markets. It becomes clear with your first few steps that winter turns even familiar paths into uncertain ground. Snow hides dips and stones, and every footprint quickly fills in behind you. The road bends toward the forest, where tall trees stand like dark pillars, their branches sagging beneath the weight of ice. A deep silence hangs between them. Not a single bird moves. The hush is so complete that even your breathing sounds louder than usual. From the fragments left in monastic storehouses, one can infer that winter journeys were often reserved for absolute necessity, whether carrying messages, delivering goods, or fulfilling religious obligations. Roads grew unpredictable, and travellers relied on instinct as much as memory. You feel that truth now as you press your boot into the snow and feel it sink deeper than expected, sending a chill through your ankle. You make your way along the narrow track where faint wagon ruts from weeks past remain visible beneath the frost. The path climbs gently, curving between trees whose shadows stretch across the snow like long, fragile threads. You listen to each footstep, testing the surface before trusting your weight to it. The cold gathers around your legs, biting harder with every step. Ahead you hear a low groaning sound. At first it seems like some distant creature, but as you pause you realize it is the wind pushing against tree trunks, causing them to shift slightly in their frozen roots. The forest mutters its own language, a mixture of creaks, sighs, and brittle snaps. You feel as though you're walking through a living organism, adjusting itself under the weight of winter. Gaps in the written pilgrim routes from rural regions have prompted historians to suggest that some winter paths were likely informal or even improvised, shaped by local knowledge, rather than recorded maps. Travellers chose routes based on wind patterns, tree cover and snow depth, all of which changed constantly. You sense how easily a wrong turn could lead to long hours in the cold. A sudden gust blows snow into your face, forcing you to close your eyes briefly. When you open them again, the track seems to shift subtly, as if the landscape itself rearranges under the wind's guidance. You adjust your direction, following a line of frost-coated shrubs that appear to mark the path's edge. The cold stings your cheeks sharply, turning your breath into thick clouds that drift backward with each step. Further along the road, you find the remains of a small wooden marker pushed halfway into the snow. Its carved head is barely visible, but the faint cross shape suggests it once guided travellers toward a distant chapel. You brush away the snow, revealing the worn grain beneath, a reminder that faith often pulled people into winter's grip, urging them to walk miles past frozen streams and silent valleys. One playful superstition, remembered in a forest village near the eastern hills, claims that touching a waymarker before a winter journey kept wolves from crossing one's path. You place your hand lightly on the marker, now the wood icy beneath your gloves. Whether or not such beliefs held power, they offered comfort in a world where darkness stretched long and threats hid beneath the surface of drifts. You continue forward, and the trees begin to thin. The path widens slightly, revealing a frozen field caught in silver moonlight. Each blade of grass lies trapped beneath a brittle casing of ice. The field stretches far in both directions, uninterrupted and pale. Crossing it feels like stepping into an open hand of winter itself. Your boots slide slightly on patches where the snow conceals a thin film of ice. You move carefully, measuring each step. The only sounds around you are the faint crunch of snow and the steady rhythm of your breathing. A cold breeze sweeps across the field, carrying with it the faint aroma of pine from the forest you left behind. Travellers' duty logs from cold months mention, with striking consistency, that the greatest danger on winter roads was not the darkness but the deceptive stillness. It lulled travellers into misjudging distances, causing them to overestimate their strength or underestimate the coming storm. You watch the horizon now, noting how the clouds begin to thicken, gathering into a heavy mass that hints at more snow. Halfway across the field, you spot a small shelter, barely more than a wooden shed. Its door hangs crooked on its hinges, but the structure stands firm. You approach it, push the door open, and step inside. The interior is dim and cold, yet it provides a momentary refuge from the wind. Straw lies scattered on the ground, frozen, but still enough to rest on. Several marks along the wall show where past travellers carved their names or symbols, quiet evidence of shared struggle against the season. After a short rest, you step back into the open field. Snow begins to fall again, heavier this time. The flakes swirl chaotically, blurring the path ahead. You tighten your cloak press forward and let the momentum carry you. Each step becomes an act of will. The cold gnaws at your fingertips, and your breath grows sharp, but the rhythm of walking steadies your mind. Beyond the field, the road narrows again, winding between low stone walls now half buried under snow. You trail your hand along the top of the wall, its surface hard with frost. The stones guide you forward, marking the final stretch toward a cluster of cottages lit faintly by scattered lanterns. As you approach the distant glow, fatigue settles gently into your muscles. Winter has a way of shaping every journey into a test, reminding you that even simple errands take on the weight of endurance. But the promise of warmth ahead pushes you onward. The snow falls softer now, drifting like pale feathers that guide you toward shelter. When you finally step into the reach of lantern light, you feel your shoulders ease the cold, lifting slightly from your chest. Though the journey was difficult, it has given you a deeper understanding of what it meant to travel through winter in the Middle Ages. Each footstep carried risk, intention, and faith woven together across miles of frozen ground. You move toward the edge of the settlement as the snowfall softens into a steady curtain of white. The lantern light behind you fades, replaced by the muted glow of the moon, filtering through drifting clouds. Ahead lies a cluster of barns and small sheds built from rough timber, their roofs steep enough to shed heavy snow while still sagging under its weight. A faint chorus of muffled sounds rises from inside the structures, a mixture of shuffling hooves, soft bleats, and the gentle rustle of straw. Even in the deepest cold, the animals breathe life into the stillness. As you approach the nearest barn, a farmer waves you inside with a tired but welcoming gesture. The interior is dim lit by a few tallow candles set in iron holders. Warm air rises from the animals' bodies, carrying with it the scents of hay-damp wool and soil. You exhale and feel relief spreading slowly into your chest. The heat here may be modest, but compared to the freezing air outside, it feels generous. Clues recorded in a handful of agricultural tallies preserved in northern estates point to winter, tending as one of the most demanding responsibilities of the season. Livestock provided milk, meat, wool, and traction power, and their survival could determine whether a household entered spring secure or hungry. You sense the weight of that truth as the farmer moves from stall to stall, checking each animal with practiced familiarity. A cow turns her head toward you, breath steaming through the chilly air as she shifts her hooves on the straw. The farmer strokes her side and whispers softly, as though calming a restless child. He explains that cows lose energy quickly in severe cold, so he rises every few hours at night to check their condition. Sleep becomes an afterthought in months like this. The steady rhythm of care takes precedence. Farther inside, goats huddle together, their small bodies pressed tightly against one another for warmth. Two children crouch beside them, spreading fresh straw and adjusting a blanket woven from rough wool. One of the goats bleats softly and nuzzles the boy's arm. He smiles, proud of his work. Gaps in animal keeping manuals from early rural regions leave modern researchers debating whether winter feed relied more on dried grasses or stored root vegetables. The written instructions that survive contradict one another, likely reflecting local differences rather than universal methods. Watching the farmer now, you realize that most decisions stem from experience and intuition rather than fixed rules. A donkey stands near the doorway, its breath creating small clouds that drift upward and vanish into the rafters. The farmer reaches for a bucket filled with warm mash made from soaked grains. He lifts it slowly and places it in front of the donkey, who begins to eat with steady, determined bites. The warmth of the food seems to spread through the animal's body, softening its posture. One eccentric observation from a castle laundress's surviving diary notes that some households believed brushing livestock with pine twigs strengthened their spirits against winter illnesses. Whether or not anyone in this barn follows that belief, you notice a bundle of pine resting near the wall. The needles release a faint, clean scent that mingles with the earthy aroma of straw. A pig stirs in a nearby pen, shifting beneath a mound of straw until only its ears remain visible. Its breath rises slowly, followed by a gentle snort. The farmer laughs quietly and tells you that the pig refuses to emerge until spring sun warms the ground. Judging by the thickness of straw covering it, he may not be exaggerating. You step deeper into the barn and watch as the children refill water troughs. The water freezes quickly here, so they break the ice with small wooden mallets and pour in fresh warm water carried from the house. Their cheeks glow red from effort, and cold, yet they work with a sense of purpose far beyond their years. The floor beneath your boots is layered with packed straw warm from the animals' bodies. You crouch down beside a sheep, whose wool looks thick and tangled. A girl brushes the animal, gently removing bits of frozen straw from its coat. The sheep closes its eyes, leaning into the rhythm of the brush. You can feel the creature's warmth radiating outward, almost like a small hearth of its own. A row of chickens occupies a small enclosure at the far end of the barn. Their feathers puff outward, forming round shapes that hold warmth close to their bodies. A thin layer of frost covers the edges of their roost, yet the birds seem content shifting, only when another chicken hops beside them. The farmer tells you that eggs become scarce at this time of year, but any that appear are treated like treasures. You pause near a gap in the wall, where a draft slips through. Snowflakes ride the wind drifting into the barn, before melting on the straw. The cold reminds you how fragile this warmth is. A single mistake, a poorly sealed door, a broken latch, or an illness spreading through the herd could turn winter from difficult to devastating. Children carry armfuls of hay from the loft above. They toss it into the feeding troughs with a practiced motion that keeps the strands loose and fluffy. The animals respond with eager chewing. Even small tasks like this carry enormous importance. Food shared now might mean survival weeks later. The farmer asks you to help secure a reinforced board along one of the outer walls. You hold it in place while he hammers wooden pegs through the slats. With each strike, echoes rise through the rafters. The reinforcement helps block drafts that sneak into the barn during storms. You feel the difference immediately as the breeze weakens. In a corner illuminated by a single candle, the farmer's wife prepares a mixture of herbs and warm water. She explains that the concoction soothes sore throats in the animals and provides a small energy boost during colder nights. Her motions are slow, precise, and shaped by years of experience. When she finishes, she pours the mixture into a bucket and carries it toward a cow resting near the far stall. The barn quiets as the animals settle into a shared rhythm of breathing and shifting. You listen to the steady cadence, a warm chorus that fills the space with life. The air vibrates gently with their presence. Even though the world outside remains harsh and frozen, inside this barn existence persists through care, effort, and memory. When you finally step outside again, the cold presses against your skin with renewed force, yet you feel a lingering warmth from the animals and their keepers. Their struggle echoes the wider story of winter in the Middle Ages, where life endured through attention, endurance, and quiet determination. Snow begins to fall again, settling on your shoulders as you continue your journey through the night. The snow has grown deeper by the time you leave the barns behind. Each step sinks a little further than you expect, and your cloak gathers a thin crust of frost along its edges. The cold presses in from all sides, as if winter itself is curious about your persistence. You pull your hood tighter and continue along a narrow path that winds between a row of small cottages. From several doorways, you see villagers adjusting layers of clothing before stepping outside, preparing themselves for the long night ahead. You pause near a cottage where a woman stands beside a wooden bench piled with garments. She holds a woolen tunic in her hands, inspecting its seams by candlelight. The fabric looks thick, woven tightly, and you can almost feel its warmth radiating toward you. She folds it carefully, then reaches for a long strip of linen meant to wrap around her arms. The care she takes with each piece reminds you that winter clothing is far more than decoration. It is a barrier, a shield, and sometimes a lifeline. A little farther ahead, a young boy tugs at the sleeves of his overshirt, while his mother fastens a fur-lined hood around his neck. The boy wiggles impatiently, but she shakes her head gently, insisting on a second inner layer. He sighs defeated, but soon smiles when she slips a pair of wool mittens onto his hands. He presses them to his cheeks, enjoying the warmth. When examining the winter rosters kept by aging stewards, one finds scattered notes describing how households prepared specific layers for particular temperatures, with heavy wool reserved for the coldest nights and lighter cloth used during milder hours. Clothing proved not only practical but strategic, with each layer chosen for a precise purpose. Watching the villagers, now you see how instinctively they apply this knowledge. A group of men gathers at the edge of the lane, each dressed in multiple layers that give them a padded, almost rounded appearance. They pull up their cloaks as the wind howls softly, sending loose snow swirling around their legs. One man adjusts a belt made from plaited leather, pulling it snug to trap the heat beneath his garments. Another ties strips of cloth around his boots, creating makeshift gaiters to keep snow from slipping inside. The evening grows darker, and the moon casts a pale sheen over the white landscape. You continue walking, noticing that everyone you pass wears layers arranged in unique combinations. A young girl wraps a wool scarf twice around her face, leaving only her eyes exposed. An elderly man secures a patchwork mantle across his shoulders, the fabric worn but repaired many times over. Each stitch in the mantle seems to carry the memory of winters past. Ethno-historians who study seasonal customs reach incompatible interpretations when they attempt to understand why certain layering techniques appear in some regions and not others. Was it simply availability of materials, or did deeper cultural habits shape winter attire? The surviving evidence scatters in different directions, leaving room for multiple, plausible explanations. You approach a cottage where two women sit weaving near the doorway. Their hands move quickly, despite the cold fingers, gliding through wool strands that twist into long, sturdy lengths of yarn. The rhythm of their weaving blends with the soft crackling of their brazier. They laugh quietly as they work adjusting the tension on the threads, with the casual expertise of those who have spent countless winters preparing vital garments. Beside them, a young shepherd mends a tear in his cloak. He pulls the needle through the fabric with slow, determined motions. Each loop tightens the cloth, closing the gap, little by little. His cloak bears patches from past years, different shades of wool, stitched together to form a mosaic of practicality. When he finishes, he holds the cloak up to the firelight and nods with satisfaction. You notice a pair of boots resting near the fire. Their leather looks worn and creased, but the insides are lined with soft rabbit fur. The shepherd catches your glance and explains that these boots are saved for the coldest mornings when frost creeps beneath the doorframe and the path uphill turns icy. Shoes that carry you through winter must be treated with care even when they are old. As you continue walking, you feel a new gust of wind cutting across the open field. It makes your own layers seem suddenly insufficient. You adjust your cloak, pulling it tighter across your chest, and envy the way villagers have perfected the art of bundling. Wool beneath linen fur beside cloth cords, tightened just enough to trap heat, but not enough to restrict movement. Everything serves a purpose. A seldom mentioned rhyme traded among winter mill hands claims that tying a thin braided cord around the waist before layering garments helped keep warmth centered in the body. As you observe people preparing themselves for the night's chill, you spot at least two villagers quietly fastening cords in this fashion, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps because old customs linger, even when no one recalls their origins. You reach the village's outer boundary, where a small shed houses tools, extra garments, and bundles of dried reeds used for weaving. A man stands inside, sorting through a collection of hoods. Some are thick with fur, others thin and worn. He chooses one with sturdy stitching and wraps it around his shoulders like a mantle. The contrast between layers interests you. He wears an undertunic of faded colour, a middle garment of lightly felted wool, and an outer cloak made from rough cloth. Each layer combats a different part of winter's assault. The ground beneath your feet crunches sharply as you continue along the path. Snow clings to your boots, forming small clusters that melt and refreeze as you walk. You pass a group of travellers arriving from a nearby village. Their clothing is dusted with frost, yet they seem unbothered thanks to the layers that insulate their bodies. One traveller carries a bundle of spare cloth strips, explaining that they are used to wrap ankles and wrists during sudden cold snaps. The wind grows sharper, still slicing across the open area like a cold tide. You raise your collar and shield your face with your hand. The villagers nearby do the same, tightening ties and adjusting cloaks. Layers rustle softly in the wind, sounding almost like leaves brushing together in a distant forest. As you turn back toward the village centre, the glow of hearth light beckons from several windows. Bundled figures move in and out of doorways, performing last tasks before retreating inside. Children run their footsteps, muffled in the snow, their laughter trailing behind them like a fragile ribbon of warmth. Even under heavy clothing, their joy stays bright. Walking through this layering ritual, you realise just how central clothing was to surviving medieval winters. It was not simply a matter of fashion, but a daily negotiation with the cold woven from skill, memory, and necessity. Every garment told a story about the household that made it, repaired it, or handed it down. When you finally return to the heart of the village, the warmth spilling from the doorways feels even more welcoming. You pause, brushing snow from your sleeves, and appreciate the simple miracle of layered cloth standing between you and the winter's wide, relentless chill. You walk toward the far edge of the village where the well stands, its stone walls coated in a thin shimmer of frost that sparkles under the dim moonlight. The air grows colder with each step, as though the wind here carries a sharper edge than anywhere else you have been tonight. Your breath rises in white plumes that drift upward before dissolving into the dark. Ahead, a small group of villagers clusters around the well, their lanterns swaying gently in the winter breeze. The bucket rope creaks as a young man hauls it upward. When the bucket reaches the top, the contents inside are not liquid, but a solid chunk of ice fused to the wood. He sighs, tapping the block against the stone wall until it fractures into smaller pieces. These shards scatter across the rim like pale gemstones, glittering briefly before melting against his warm gloves. Tracing the margins of a damaged candlemaker's ledger, it becomes possible to notice small notations marking how often villagers were forced to melt snow rather than draw from wells during severe winters. The entries are brief and hurried, but they reveal a pattern of adaptation that speaks to long months of scarcity. Standing by the frozen well now, you see how that adaptation unfolds in real time. A woman kneels beside a shallow basin, set onto the snow. She gathers clean snow from nearby drifts, packing it gently into the basin until it forms a small mound. She presses her hands over it to shape it, then lifts the basin carefully and carries it toward a nearby fire where another villager tends a simmering pot. Snow will melt slowly, she tells you, and the resulting water must be rationed wisely. Children gather around the fire, holding small clay cups. One of the adults pours warm water into the cups, though only a thin splash for each child. They hold the cups close to their faces, inhaling the rising heat as if it were a rare luxury. Even the steam feels valuable. The village elder approaches the well and taps gently at the ice forming along the inner walls. His knuckles knock softly against the frozen rim. He explains that sometimes the well itself freezes to the point of becoming unusable, trapping water far below where it cannot be reached until warmer days. In years like these, snow becomes the village's primary water source, collected carefully to avoid contamination. Those who analyse surviving testimonies grapple with whether certain communities implemented formal snow collecting routines or whether the practice arose chaotically, depending on immediate need. The evidence points in multiple directions, leaving the truth obscured behind regional differences and lost records. You watch as two men carry a wooden tub from a nearby shed. The tub looks old, with iron bands that creak with each movement, yet it remains sturdy enough for collecting ice. They take turns smashing a thicker section of the well's frozen surface using iron mallets. The mallets rise and fall in a steady rhythm, cracking the ice into large slabs. Each slab must be lifted carefully to avoid slipping back into the dark shaft below. One man rubs his hands together vigorously, then holds them over the lantern flame. His fingers are stiff and his breath trembles in the cold. He laughs weakly, joking that the ice seems to freeze faster than they can move it. The others nod in agreement, their faces showing the familiar fatigue of winter's endless demands. An odd remark, scratched into the handle of an old barn lantern, recounts how some villagers believed that speaking softly while gathering ice kept the winter spirits calm. Loud voices, they said, invited storms. Whether or not this belief holds any sway, the villagers here speak in hushed tones, their whispers barely louder than the wind. Nearby, a young girl uses a small metal cup to scoop slush from the edges of the well. She pours it into a large clay jar that sits beside her. When the jar is nearly full, she covers it with cloth to prevent snow from blowing inside. She handles the task with surprising seriousness, as though water management is a skill passed down with great care. The fire crackles beside the basin of melting snow. The water inside the pot warms, gradually releasing soft coils of steam that drift upward. A woman lifts the pot slightly and feels its weight. She shakes her head. Not enough, but enough to share. You carry a bucket for one of the elders as he makes his way to a cottage at the end of the lane. The snow is deep here, rising nearly to your knees. He explains that some households cannot send their own members to the well due to illness or age, so others bring water to them. When water becomes difficult to obtain, cooperation becomes a necessity rather than a choice. On the way back, you catch the sharp scent of frozen wood smoke drifting from a cluster of huts nearby. The scent mixes with the crisp night air, creating a strange blend of warmth and cold. From the huts, you hear the faint clinking of metal pots being set over fires. Families everywhere are melting water, waiting patiently for enough to drink, cook, or clean. As the night grows deeper, frost begins to form on your eyelashes. The cold stings when you blink. The villagers around you adjust their layers, tighten their hoods, and keep working. Winter water does not gather itself. It must be coaxed from ice and snow with patience and persistence. You take one last look at the well. Its stone walls rise solemnly into the moonlight, weathered by countless winters. The rope sways slightly in the breeze. The snow around it glows faintly, illuminated by lanterns and the pale sky above. Though frozen, the well remains a symbol of survival. Each bucket of snow melted tonight represents another step forward, another breath of endurance. By the time you return to the village centre, your cheeks sting and your hands ache despite your gloves. Yet you carry with you a deeper understanding of how precious water becomes in a world where warmth is fleeting and ice grows faster than fire can melt it. Winter shapes every drop, and every drop matters. The cold intensifies as you return to the heart of the village. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin grey ribbons that spiral into the dark sky, dissolving into drifting snowflakes. Lanterns glow faintly through frosted windows, turning each cottage into a small island of warmth, surrounded by the endless white. The night is deep but not silent. You hear soft voices carried by the wind threads of conversation, weaving together with the crackling of distant fires. You follow the murmurs until you reach a small gathering outside a cottage where a few villagers stand near a low brazier. The flames flutter in the cold air, casting long shadows that dance across the snow. The villagers speak quietly, as if the night itself might be listening. A young woman holds a sprig of evergreen in her gloved hand. She turns it slowly, watching the needles catch the light. She explains that many families place evergreen branches above their doorways to keep misfortune from slipping inside during the darkest weeks. The belief is old, she says, older than memory passed down, because it feels right even when its origins are forgotten. Among the scattered references found in wintertime field sermons recorded by travelling clerics, one can detect faint traces of local customs absorbed into Christian observance, including the practice of marking door frames with greenery during nights when sunlight felt farthest away. The practice was subtle, but its persistence across generations reveals how deeply villagers valued signs of resilience amid the cold. A group of children stands nearby, holding small leather pouches tied with twine. When you ask about them, an older woman smiles and explains that each pouch holds a token meant to bring luck through the winter. Some contain dried berries, others small stones, and others scraps of wool knotted in careful patterns. The children take turns shaking their pouches, listening to the soft rattle inside. She leans in slightly, voice soft and serious. On nights like this, she says, people honour certain quiet rituals meant to protect the hearth. She gestures toward the brazier, where a man drops a pinch of crushed herbs into the flames. The herbs crackle and flare, releasing a brief bright spark. He watches the flames settle, nodding with satisfaction. Textual analysts studying early household records sometimes reach incompatible conclusions when they attempt to reconstruct the meaning of these rituals. Some argue they represent remnants of ancient seasonal rites, while others believe they arose simply from the daily struggle to interpret winter's harshness. The surviving descriptions vary too much for a single tidy explanation. A faint breeze moves through the gathering, carrying with it the scent of burning pine. A man adjusts his cloak and tells a story about leaving a bowl of warm porridge on the table overnight to ensure that wandering spirits stayed satisfied rather than mischievous. He recounts the tale with a half smile, unsure whether the custom holds any real power, but unwilling to abandon it. In a season as unforgiving as this one, people cling to rituals that make the darkness feel tamer. A rustic superstition, preserved in a ropemaker's chant, told that tying a single knot in one's sash before sleeping guarded against unpleasant dreams during frozen nights. As he speaks, you notice a few villagers subtly adjusting their belts as though echoing a gesture learned long ago. More villagers arrive, drawn by the warmth of the brazier. They share stories, each offering a different winter belief. One sighs thoughtfully while explaining that her grandmother insisted on tapping the corners of the house with a wooden spoon before the longest night of the year. Another says that if a bird sings after sunset in midwinter, it means a mild season ahead. A third warns quietly that stepping over a fallen broom before sunrise invites illness. The stories vary in tone. Some are light-hearted, some are solemn. All reflect the village's ongoing conversation with the season. Winter invites superstition because it demands explanation and comfort, especially on nights when the cold feels almost alive. The brazier crackles softly, offering a warm orange glow. People stretch their hands toward it, turning their palms to catch as much heat as possible. Their breath lingers in front of them in slow-moving clouds that vanish as quickly as they appear. Someone adds another branch to the fire. Sparks leap upward, tiny constellations flickering against the dark. You drift a little farther from the group, watching how the firelight shapes their faces. The snow around them glitters like powdered glass. Their silhouettes lean inward, forming a circle that feels both fragile and timeless. Nearby, a young girl hangs a small charm above the doorframe of her family's cottage. It looks like a simple loop of twine, decorated with a dried berry. She steps back satisfied. Her father explains quietly that the charm is meant to welcome good fortune and keep sorrow from lingering. Even if no one remembers when the custom began, people honour it because it feels like part of winter's fabric. You walk past another cottage where a family arranges candles on a narrow wooden shelf. They light each one slowly, whispering short phrases of hope for the coming months. The flames flicker softly, casting warm reflections on the frost-covered glass. A man closes his shutters carefully, leaving a small gap so that the glow inside spills into the snow outside. He tells you that leaving a trace of light visible to the world helps guide lost travellers or wandering spirits towards safety. The idea carries a strange comfort, bridging practicality with belief. The night continues deepening, and the village settles into a quiet rhythm, shaped by superstition, memory, and shared hope. As you walk, you feel the weight of these beliefs surrounding you, like a second cloak born not of wool, but of human resilience. You pause, letting the cold settle briefly into your lungs before exhaling slowly. The air feels heavy, with meaning shaped by rituals that softened winter's hardest edges. These customs may shift and evolve, but each one carries a spark of warmth into nights that might otherwise feel unbearably long. With the brazier's glow fading behind you, you continue toward the next corner of the winter village. The night has not yet surrendered to dawn when you step outside once more. The sky hangs in a deep shade of blue, almost black at the edges, with only the faintest glow hinting at the approaching sunrise. The air feels sharper than anything you've encountered so far. It clings to your skin and slips beneath your clothing, no matter how tightly you pull your layers together. Frost glitters across the ground in thick patterns, each crystal catching what little moonlight remains. The world seems frozen mid-breath, waiting for the moment when the sun finally rises. Your boots crunch through a layer of snow so thin and brittle that the sound breaks like glass underfoot. You pause to listen. The village is quiet, but not entirely still. Far off, you hear the low murmur of someone preparing a fire. A shutter creaks gently as a villager opens it to check the weather. A dog shakes itself somewhere beyond your sight, causing a faint cascade of frost to fall from its fur. These soft, fragile noises echo through the pre-dawn air, like the first signals of life returning to the world. You draw your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The cold at this hour feels different from the cold of evening. It is harder, more insistent, as though winter presses its full weight onto the land before the sun arrives to negotiate a temporary truce. Your breath forms thick clouds that hang in the air longer than usual. The tips of your fingers ache slightly despite your gloves. Even blinking produces a faint sting, the cold settling so close to your eyelashes that each movement feels deliberate. When soil layers beneath abandoned farmsteads were examined, one pattern emerged, that rural communities shaped their entire morning routine around the coldest hour, rising earlier to coax fires to life before tasks could begin. These findings reflect how deeply the dawn chill shaped household rhythms across harsh winters. You move toward the center of the village where a few figures emerge from their homes. Their steps are slow, heavy, with sleep but purposeful. One man carries an armful of firewood, his breath drifting upward in a long trail. Another woman rushes to her shed and returns with a bundle of herbs kept safe for morning broths. A child heads toward the well, carefully navigating icy patches along the path. Shadows stretch long and thin as lanterns flicker from doorways. The soft glow casts a warm contrast against the crisp blue darkness. You follow the sound of someone splitting wood behind a cottage. The rhythmic thud rings through the cold air, each strike sending a spray of frost into the dim light. The woodcutter pauses, often rubbing his hands and blowing warm breath onto his fingers, yet he keeps at his task with determined focus. Because the testimonies break off abruptly, in several places analysts struggle to decide whether villagers maintained morning rituals consistently or adapted them from year to year based on the severity of winter. The fractured nature of the sources leaves a tapestry woven with gaps rather than certainty. A flock of birds stirs suddenly in one of the nearby trees. Their wings rustle softly, dislodging a cloud of frost that drifts to the ground in a delicate shimmer. You watch them flutter higher, huddling together on a different branch to stay warm. Even animals appear hesitant at this hour, as if sensing the cold's full strength before the sun reduces its bite. You pass a small shed where a woman trims frozen reeds into thin strips. She explains quietly that she uses them to reinforce baskets, which often warp or crack in extreme cold. Her breath hovers around her face like mist as she works. Despite the bitter air, her hands move quickly, shaped by long practice. She pauses only to flex her fingers or warm them at a lantern nearby. Elsewhere, a man kneels beside a pot hanging over a freshly lit fire. He stirs a thin porridge made from the last of the previous day's grains. The smell is faint but nourishing. He adds a small pinch of herbs and nods with contentment. The steam rising from the pot curls into the air, mixing with the cold and fading slowly upward. A tattered winter verse, once sung by shepherd boys, claimed that whoever first stepped outside at dawn would carry the warmth of the next sunrise in their pockets all day. As you move between cottages, you notice several villagers stepping outside briefly, perhaps hoping the old rhyme holds a sliver of truth. A thin streak of pink appears at the horizon, stretched across the dark like a brushstroke. The faint light touches the snow and transforms it from dull blue to shimmering silver. You inhale and feel the air shift. The cold remains biting, but something in it softens, as though the world begins to release its overnight tension. A few villagers gather near the well, stamping their feet to stay warm. One lifts a bucket, carefully wary of the ice that has formed along the rope. Another checks the ground for safe footing. Their movements appear slow and cautious, shaped by the understanding that ice can turn any task dangerous. Yet they speak softly, exchanging warm greetings between visible breaths. One cottage door opens wide enough for you to glimpse a family gathered around a small fire. The flames dance gently, illuminating their faces with gold. The parents hand each child a cup of warming broth. The children sip carefully, cradling the cups in both hands. Their cheeks glow pink from the heat, a vivid contrast to the icy morning outside. A whistle of wind glides through the lane, pulling at your hood and brushing across the rooftops. Snow lifts in delicate plumes and spirals through the dim light like drifting smoke. You feel winter's breath run past you, sharp and cool, leaving your senses awakened. The village slowly gains momentum as dawn approaches. Fires crackle, doors open, and people emerge to begin their duties despite the cold. The early morning darkness transforms gradually, layered with sound, movement, and life. Though the cold remains at its harshest, the presence of others softens its weight. By the time the first golden rays of sunrise begin to crest over the distant hills, the village hums with quiet resilience. Warmth may not have reached the land yet, but it reaches the people. Their breath, footsteps, and murmured greetings knit the cold morning into something survivable, even familiar. You stand for a moment longer, letting the frost kiss your eyelashes and the lights settle across your path before you continue into the awakening day. The first colours of dawn spread slowly across the sky as you walk toward a set of small outbuildings at the edge of the village. The structures sit low to the ground, their roofs heavy with snow, their wooden walls sealed as tightly as possible against frozen wind. As daylight strengthens, the frost that coats the hinges and latches glimmers in pale gold. Inside these sheds and cellars lies the heart of winter survival. Food here must last not days but entire seasons. Your boots slip slightly on a patch of ice as you approach a cellar door, half buried beneath a drift. A man kneels beside it, using a wooden shovel to clear the snow. His breath coils upward in thick clouds. When the door is finally exposed, he lifts the latch with careful fingers. The hinges protest with a low groan as he opens the entrance, revealing a steep set of wooden steps descending into darkness. He gestures for you to follow. Inside, the air feels cooler than the morning outside, but steadier. The cold here is intentional. It holds everything in place, slowing decay and preserving what the family gathered in warmer months. Lantern light reveals rows of clay jars sealed with wax bundles of dried herbs, tied with coarse string sacks of grain resting against the far wall, and twists of dried fish hanging from ceiling beams. Comparing winter tithe percentages to summer records uncovers a telling discrepancy that households often relied far more on preserved foods than on any fresh resources, a pattern that appears clearly across estate accounts from multiple regions. The supplies laid out before you echo that lifeline, each carefully stored with intent and ritual. A woman reaches for a jar with both hands, brushing dust from its lid, before lifting it gently. She cracks the wax seal using a small iron tool, revealing dried slices of apples within. The fruit is darkened by time, but still fragrant. She lifts one piece and smiles faintly before offering it to you. It carries the memory of summer sun, a pleasant contradiction to the chill around you. Stacks of root vegetables fill a wooden crate near your feet. Turnips, parsnips, and winter carrots lie arranged in careful layers of straw. The straw insulates them, shielding each from frost and moisture. A young girl lifts a turnip and taps it lightly, listening for a firm sound that signals it remains good to eat. Her small gesture reflects years of observation passed down in the simplest ways. Those who attempt to rebuild the seasonal mindset from scattered notes seldom arrive at the same conclusion about how much food preservation varied between villages. The evidence points to improvisation shaped by geography, climate shifts, and local innovation rather than uniform practices. You follow the family outside again as they move toward another shed where smoked meat hangs from long rafters. The smell grows richer as the door opens. The strips of meat sway slightly in the cold air, each piece darkened by hours of smoke and careful drying. A teenage boy steps inside with a practiced eye, checking the firmness of the cuts and trimming away any frost that may have seeped in overnight. Beside him, an older woman scrapes salt from a wooden trough. She spreads it with bare hands, smoothing the grains into an even layer before placing several smaller meat strips atop it. The salt helps draw out moisture, protecting the food from spoiling. Her hands appear rough from repeated contact with the coarse crystals, yet she works with ease and precision. Outside, a man begins chopping a pile of frozen fish. The fish are caught near the river before winter fully locks it in ice, then dried, smoked or salted, depending on family preference. He uses a heavy wooden mallet rather than a knife, striking the fish in quick rhythmic motions that separate them into manageable portions. Snow continues to fall lightly as villagers head toward a communal storage pit, partially hidden beneath a mound of frost. They lift the wooden cover with a grunt, revealing a cavity lined with straw and stones. Inside are jars of pickled vegetables, preserved months earlier using a mixture of vinegar, herbs, and late-season produce. The villagers examine each jar carefully before pulling out what they need. A spindle-maker's winter rhyme, seldom sung but never fully forgotten, once claimed that a house whose pickles stayed clear all season would enjoy calm weather in the coming year. The villagers chuckle when you mention this old verse, but one older man admits he still checks the clarity of each jar with exaggerated ceremony. You walk toward another building where a woman prepares dried beans for storage. She pours them into a wide wooden tray, spreading them in a thin layer before picking out any that look cracked or shriveled. Her fingers move swiftly, sorting good from unusable with the judgment of someone who has repeated this task through countless winters. In a corner of the shed, bundles of grain hang upside down tied with thick cords. The grains rattle gently, when touched a sign they have dried evenly. A boy tests a bundle by pressing it against his cheek. If it feels too soft, it has absorbed moisture and must be dried longer over a low fire. The shed grows quiet as several villagers turn to their most delicate winter task. They gather bottles of oil infused with herbs. The oil helps preserve certain foods, though only households with enough resources can afford to produce it. One woman warms a bottle between her hands, swirling the contents slowly, as though listening for something inside. You step into the light again, feeling the cold strike your face. The sun has just risen above the horizon, painting the village in pale gold. You feel a faint shiver as you adjust your cloak, yet the knowledge that so much food rests safely stored around you brings a sense of quiet confidence. Winter is long, but preparation stands firm against it. You follow one of the villagers to a small stone-lined pit, shaded by a shed overhang. He lifts a layer of packed snow and reveals a cache of frozen milk stored from earlier in the season. The milk looks like white stone, rigid but clean. He explains that small chips are melted over the fire when needed, stretching the supply over many weeks. The man replaces the snow and pats it down firmly. He looks at you with a smile that carries both pride and exhaustion. Preserving food is not a single task, but a season-long story written in jars, smoke, salt, and patience. Every method stands as a negotiation with winter, a promise that endurance is possible when preparation is steady. You walk away from the sheds as the sun climbs higher, listening to the village come alive with activity. Tools clatter, snow shifts, voices rise in greeting. The day may remain cold, but the stored provisions ensure it begins with hope rather than fear. Morning light settles gently across the village as you walk toward the sound of laughter drifting from a courtyard between two cottages. The frost still clings to your cloak, but the cold feels less severe when paired with the noise of people greeting one another, exchanging smiles and shaking off the heaviness of dawn. You step closer and see a group of villagers gathered around a simple wooden table dusted with snow. They lean in, pointing, guessing, and playing a small game that involves carved wooden pieces shaped like animals. Each player takes turns moving one piece forward, announcing their guess about which animal will reach the end first once released down a tiny sloped board. The game is unpredictable, but that seems to be the point. The players burst into warm laughter every time a piece slides off the side or spins in circles instead of travelling straight. Even those not participating watch with amused eyes, glad for a moment of levity before the workday begins. From the way seasonal tools were stored in outbuildings, one can deduce that villagers intentionally set aside certain tasks to be done in groups because shared labour kept spirits steady during the darkest months. You can see that thread clearly here. Cooperation is more than efficiency. It is emotional survival. A young woman calls out to a group of children who have gathered near a pile of snow. They carry sticks, pieces of twine, and a woven basket filled with scraps. With giggles and bright breaths hanging in the air, the children begin constructing a small snow creature. It has uneven eyes and mismatched arms, one made of a bent twig and the other of a spoon someone must have abandoned earlier in the week. The children place a tuft of wool on its head, declaring it a king of winter mischief. Not far away, a man leans against the cottage wall while carving small notches into a wooden staff. He explains that every notch marks a day when the village shares breakfast together as a reminder that no one faces winter alone. Some days the meal is only broth, other days a small piece of bread and dried berries, but the meaning remains constant. He finishes a new notch with a quiet smile. Because the interpretations behind these communal routines differ so widely depending on what little written evidence survives. Cultural researchers often cannot outline a single definitive reason for why certain villages developed structured morale rituals while others relied more on spontaneous gathering. Instead, each community appears to have shaped its own social remedies for winter's emotional demands. You continue walking and find a group of elders sitting on a bench wrapped in thick furs. One of them tells a joke about a fox who tried to steal a goose, but ended up negotiating with the farmer for a bowl of stew instead. The punchline is silly, and the delivery slow, but everyone laughs with full voices. Their laughter ripples outward, warming the courtyard more effectively than the weak morning sun. Inside one cottage, the smell of warm bread lingers in the air. A woman slides a fresh loaf from the hearth oven and places it on a wooden plank to cool. She offers you a small piece. The crust cracks gently beneath your fingers, and the inside feels soft and rich. Eating it floods you with a sudden glow of comfort that reaches beyond physical warmth. Bread here is more than food, it is reassurance. A group of men prepares for a chore that none of them seems particularly excited about, repairing a sagging fence along the livestock pen. Still, they gather tools together with playful commentary. One teases another by predicting he will lose his gloves before they finish. Another claims he'll finish the job using only one hand to show off. Their exaggerations are all in good fun, light enough to keep the cold away. A lone scrap of text etched into the underside of an old spinning stool pokes fun at winter boredom, stating that anyone who managed to stay cheerful through 12 freezing nights deserved a feast. The jest is simple, but you can imagine generations chuckling at the carved words as they spun yarn on bleak evenings. You move toward the village green, where a family sweeps snow away from a flat patch of ground. They begin a rhythmical dance, stepping lightly on the packed snow, forming a circle as they move. Their bodies create a soft percussion of crunching sounds, accompanied by humming from those watching. The melody is ancient, slow and gentle. One by one, others join in until the circle becomes a living ring of warmth. Fresh smoke drifts from chimneys, curling slowly upward. The faint smell of pine mingles with the air, creating a sense of familiarity that anchors you in the present moment. A man offers warm cider from a wooden cup, the steam rising in lazy curls. You take a sip, feeling the heat spread inside your chest. The sweetness relaxes your shoulders. Across the green, an older woman recounts a short story to a cluster of children. Her voice moves softly, rising and falling like a lullaby. The tale involves a winter spirit who could only enter homes where people refused to smile, so the villagers resolved to greet each morning with a grin. The children mimic exaggerated smiles, their cheeks pink in the cold. You walk past a pair of siblings, helping their mother brush snow from the roof of their small shed. Despite the tedious work, they sing a simple tune to keep the rhythm steady. You notice the mother smiling as she listens. Music seems to soften even the most tiresome chores. A few steps away, two neighbours exchange small gifts of preserved fruit. They laugh as they claim the other person's jar is surely tastier. The exchange is symbolic, a gesture meant to strengthen bonds during a season that often isolates people. The morning grows brighter, though the sun remains pale behind a veil of clouds. Yet the warmth you feel now is surprisingly real. It comes not from the sky or the earth, but from people choosing to meet the season's severity with humour, companionship, rhythm, and shared hope. Even with the cold lingering in the air, the village pulses gently with life. You take one last look around the courtyard, noticing all the ways that joy is woven intentionally into the day. Winter may be unyielding, but so is the laughter that rises to meet it. The sun rises weakly, behind a curtain of thick winter clouds, as you step back into the village paths. The light is pale and diffused, barely warming the snow that blankets every rooftop and lane. Despite the cold, movement begins almost immediately. Deep winter does not allow anyone to linger in bed for long. Tasks left undone today become tomorrow's hardship, so people gather their strength and step into the bitter air with quiet resolve. Your boots sink into snow that has grown dense and compact after countless footprints. The texture feels coarse beneath your feet, as though winter has pressed it into a single white sheet, stretching from one house to the next. Wisps of smoke rise from chimneys, marking which homes have lit their fires first. As you walk, you hear the thumping of heavy boots and the scrape of wooden tools being moved from sheds into courtyards. Near the livestock pens, several men work to clear frost from hinges and latches. They take turns tapping gently at the metal to avoid cracking it. Each strike produces a small ringing sound that carries through the cold air. One man rubs his hands vigorously and breathes onto them before gripping his tool again. Another kneels in the snow to adjust a wooden brace weakened by moisture. By studying the residues left in wooden troughs excavated from long-abandoned winter farms, researchers observed that villagers often rotated their cold season chores in a fixed cycle, alternating strenuous outdoor tasks with lighter indoor ones to avoid exhaustion during severe frost. Watching the villagers here, that pattern feels alive and practical rather than academic. You follow a group of women carrying bundles of dried reeds toward the river's edge. The river, though nearly frozen, still flows beneath a surface of cracked ice. They strip the reeds into long fibres, weaving them quickly into mats that will line storage baskets. Their fingers move deftly, even in the stinging cold. One of them dips her hands briefly into a small basin of warm water, sighing as the heat loosens her joints. Nearby, a team of young adults works together to shovel snow away from a communal path. They speak in short bursts, saving their breath. The snow grows heavier, the deeper they dig, revealing patches of frozen ground hidden beneath. They pause often, leaning on their shovels, cheeks flushed and breath trembling. Yet every time one person stops, another steps forward to keep the rhythm from breaking. Attempts to map a consistent, deep winter routine across multiple regions fail quickly because surviving accounts contradict one another, suggesting that each community shaped its schedule based on whatever mix of weatherland and available hands defined their particular landscape. At the edge of the village, an older woman kneels beside a wooden wash tub set over a small fire pit. She melts snow in the tub, using the warm water to wash wool garments that cannot wait until spring. The steam rises in slow curls, catching the light. She scrubs gently, wringing the fabric with practiced strength. The washed wool stiffens almost instantly in the freezing air, so she hangs each piece near the fire before it hardens completely. A boy nearby chips ice from the rim of a barrel used to collect water runoff. Each chunk he loosens falls with a sharp clatter. His breath forms steady clouds as he works, and he hums a quiet tune to keep his pace steady. The humming drifts into the air like a soft thread weaving through the morning. You walk toward a field where men are repairing fencing. Their tools clack against frozen wood. Pieces of splintered timber lie scattered in the snow, evidence of windstorms from earlier nights. They gather the fragments and sort them into piles, saving whatever can be salvaged. One man uses a heated iron rod to soften a frozen knot in the wood, allowing it to bend rather than snap. Carved along the inner rim of a frost-worn barrel used during midwinter fairs, a cheerful line of graffiti once quipped that anyone who finished their chores before the sun rose deserved a feast of honey cakes. The phrase makes the villagers chuckle when you repeat it, though they admit no one has ever managed such a feat. Deeper in the village, you find several women grinding grain using stone querns placed close to a fire for warmth. The stones turn slowly, each rotation, releasing a soft rumbling sound. The grain dust rises in faint clouds that sparkle faintly in the dim light. They pause occasionally to stretch their arms or brush loose snowflakes from their sleeves. Inside a nearby cottage, children help their grandmother prepare bundles of herbs for cooking and medicine. Some herbs keep their strength even in winter, and she sorts them carefully. The children tie small knots at the ends of each bundle, their fingers clumsy but eager. The grandmother smiles each time they complete a bundle without dropping it. Outside again, you pass a pair of villagers reinforcing the roof of a small shed. They use long poles to knock snow from the highest section, careful not to let the weight collapse the beams. Snow falls in cascading sheets, sparkling as it tumbles through the air. The shed shakes slightly under the impact, but once the snow clears, the roof looks steadier. A man stands near the woodpile splitting logs with a heavy axe. He raises the tool high, bringing it down with a sharp crack. Wood splits cleanly. When it is frozen, he says, though the work becomes far more tiring. The pile of split logs grows steadily beside him, forming a small mountain of jagged pieces, ready for the hearth. Another group prepares a batch of winter glue, using leftover animal hide and ashes. The mixture simmers over a small fire, producing a strong smell. Once cooled, the glue will be used to repair tools, seal cracks, and secure bindings. Their hands move carefully as they stir, knowing that a poorly mixed batch can ruin an entire day's work. You step into a narrow alley between two cottages and watch a teenager mend a broken sled runner. He scrapes frost from the wood, warms the piece near a small brazier, then fits it into place with remarkable skill. He looks up only briefly to acknowledge your presence before returning to his task with quiet determination. Winter chores continue throughout the village, each task small but essential. People move with steady purpose, focusing on the needs of the moment rather than the weight of the season. The cold remains unforgiving, yet every completed chore punctures its severity a little more. By the time midday approaches, the village hums with the comforting sound of progress. Snow piles have shifted fences, strengthened tools, repaired food, prepared water gathered. Winter may be harsh, but the rhythm of labour transforms the cold into something manageable. You take a final breath of crisp air, watching villagers move as a unified tapestry of effort, and continue your path deeper into the day. You notice the change long before anyone says a word. As afternoon settles into a heavy grey dusk, the air begins to tighten, as if the world inhales and forgets to exhale again. The snow beneath your boots feels harder than it did earlier, packed so firmly that it no longer yields even a centimetre. The cold deepens with a sudden sharpness that seems to reach through your layers of clothing and tap directly against your skin. Villagers sense it too. You see them quicken their pace, adjusting hoods and checking latches, as though responding to an unspoken warning. The wind quiets. That is always the first sign. Instead of howling between cottages, it retreats into an eerie stillness that leaves the village frozen in expectant silence. No branches creak. No snowdrifts shift. Even the dogs seem to pause their ears, tilting upward, as if listening to something distant but unmistakable. The coldest nights, you learn, arrive not with noise, but with a hush so complete it unsettles the senses. Lanterns appear earlier than usual. A few villagers move from house to house, distributing extra tallow candles. Children help carry small bundles of wood from sheds, their breath rising in pale columns. Someone checks the shutters again, to be sure no corner remains slightly ajar. A man reinforces the doorframe of his cottage with a thick board, testing it twice before nodding to himself. From the crystalline formations found layered inside long-buried window frames, historians inferred that families once lined their openings with linen soaked in brine to reduce frost creeping across the wood. The practice reveals how closely households monitored changes in cold patterns during the deepest part of winter. You walk past a garden that now lies dormant beneath a blanket of white. Only the tips of a fence remain visible. Frost clings to the wood in thick, jagged shapes that look almost sculpted. You run your glove gently across the surface and feel sharp crystals break away. They fall to the ground with a faint tinkling sound, the music of frozen stillness. The sky darkens further, taking on a bluish hue that hints at a long, severe night ahead. Villagers begin to gather inside their homes, but a few linger outside to complete their most urgent tasks. One woman stacks clay jars in a sheltered spot to keep them from cracking. Another man braces a roof beam using a wooden support, fearing heavy frost may weaken it by morning. Their movements carry deliberate focus, each motion shaped by experience. Efforts to reassemble a consistent sequence of warning signs from surviving winter accounts collapse quickly, since what one region described as a harbinger of bitter cold appears entirely absent in another. These contradictions suggest that local memory shaped each community's understanding more strongly than any universal pattern. The sky grows darker still. You feel the air sharpen each time you inhale, as though the cold has turned metallic. Even your eyelashes begin to collect frost. A villager hands you a strip of wool to wrap around your neck, explaining that the worst nights can chill your breath so deeply it aches in your bones. You notice the ice forming differently now. Instead of the thin, translucent sheen you saw earlier in the day, the new frost crawls up walls in branching patterns like pale vines. It creeps along window edges and settles into the grooves of wooden beams. One cottage has frost flowers blooming across its shutters, each shape uniquely delicate. The sight is beautiful, though also slightly ominous. A cluster of villagers gathers near a communal fire pit. They feed the flames with seasoned wood, careful not to let the fire shrink too small. Sparks rise and vanish into the dense air. Children sit close together, clutching warm stones wrapped in cloth. Adults check the sky, comparing the cloud shapes to memories of past winters. A half-remembered charm, once whispered by ferrymen, claimed that frost forming on the inside of a door hinge meant the night would press down harder than the day before. When you mention this line to the villagers, one elder chuckles, another nods thoughtfully, and a third mutters that he will check his hinges before nightfall, just in case. You continue walking and see households sealing every vulnerable seam. Wool scraps fill cracks in door frames, and animal skins hang across entryways to block drafts. Someone sprinkles ash along the threshold, not as a ritual, but as a practical measure to track where the cold air leaks inward. The ash shifts slightly as the wind changes, forming patterns that families read with surprising accuracy. As you approach the village green, you see a small group staring upward. You follow their gaze. Thin arcs of pale light shimmer across the horizon. Not quite an aurora, not quite moonglow, but something faint and brief. The villagers exchange quiet comments. They call it sky frost, a sign that the cold has pushed so high into the atmosphere that even the stars feel distant. The animals sense it too. A pair of goats refuses to leave their shelter, pressing close to one another. Chickens huddle together in their coop, forming a single sphere of feathers. A dog curls tightly against a warm brick near its pen, eyes half closed but alert. The air thickens again, pressing against your nostrils and cheeks. The sun is completely gone now, replaced by a dim reflection that barely touches the snow. The villagers now move with even greater urgency. Beds will be piled with extra blankets. Fires will be fortified. Water stores will be wrapped so they do not freeze solid overnight. You take one final look around the village. Every motion, every precaution, every shared glance reveals an understanding carved out over countless winters. The hardest nights do not arrive unexpectedly. They whisper first, then fall silently, like a heavy curtain. As you continue forward, the first deep tremor of cold settles into the land, marking the beginning of a night no one will underestimate. The sky settles into a muted silver as afternoon drifts toward evening. You follow a narrow path leading beyond the village outskirts, where the snow lies untouched, smooth as poured flour. The silence here feels different from the hush that precedes bitter cold. It carries a faint expectancy, as if the world is holding its breath for something about to arrive. You step carefully, the snow sinking softly beneath each footfall. In the distance, you spot movement along the horizon. At first, the shapes blend with the pale landscape. Then you recognize them, travelers, wrapped tightly in cloaks, trudging through the snow with slow determination. Winter visitors rarely appear at this time of year. Journeys become dangerous, food scarce, and distances deceptively long. Yet here they are continuing toward the village with measured steps. As they approach, you see that one carries a long wooden staff with bells tied near the top. The bells are small and give only a faint jingle. Another traveller pulls a sled loaded with parcels wrapped in cloth. A third walks slightly ahead, scanning the path as though accustomed to reading terrain, even when it hides beneath snow. From comparing the wear patterns on coin hoards found near old winter roads, researchers concluded that certain trade routes remained active despite harsh conditions, but only for the caravan leaders skilled enough to time their travel between storms. These visitors appear to be the kind who calculate risks with practiced eyes. The first traveller greets the villagers waiting near the gates with a warm nod. His cheeks are red from the cold, yet his eyes shine with relief now that shelter looms close. He introduces himself as a messenger for a distant township. He carries letters, news, and small goods packed tightly to conserve space. The villagers usher him forward, offering a warm drink and a seat by the hearth once he enters a nearby cottage. Another traveller kneels beside her sled, brushing frost from the parcels. Some contain herbs, preserved in waxed cloth, others handmade wooden toys carved during long nights on the road. She explains that she sells her wares wherever people gather, valuing the exchange of stories as much as coin. Villagers gather around her with interest, eager for news from places they will likely never see. Efforts to reconstruct the motives behind winter wandering often yield conflicting interpretations, since some accounts describe travel as necessary for survival, while others portray it as a spiritual or personal calling. The nature of these journeys remains wrapped in ambiguity, shaped by circumstances that rarely left clear written traces. A young boy eyes the travellers with wide curiosity. He asks one of them whether the snow looks different in other regions. The traveller laughs and replies that in some places it sparkles more brightly, in others it falls thicker, and in some it packs so tightly that a single footprint can echo like a drumbeat. The boy listens with awe, imagining faraway landscapes shimmering under distant winter skies. A group of villagers leads the travellers toward the communal fire pit. Flames leap and sway as more wood is added. The visitors sit close, extending their hands and sighing as warmth spreads through their chilled bodies. One unwraps a small pouch and shares a handful of dried berries. Another offers a story, in return a tale about navigating a narrow pass where snow seemed to growl like a living creature. A wandering potter once etched a playful phrase onto the base of a clay jug, claiming he travelled in winter because the cold cracked the silence just enough for him to hear which path he should follow. You think of that line as the travellers describe their instincts for choosing routes where winds bend rather than break. You walk with one visitor toward the stables, where he hopes to rest his mule for the night. Frost gathers along the animal's ears and muzzle, yet it moves steadily, its hooves crunching softly in the snow. The traveller brushes the mule, gently whispering encouragement. He explains that winter travel demands a partnership between person and beast, each relying on the other to judge whether the weather is safe or shifting toward danger. Inside the stable, warm breath rises from the animals in pale plumes. The traveller removes the mule's saddle blanket, shaking off the snow. He hangs it near a small brazier so it can dry. Villagers offer fresh hay and warm water gestures the traveller accepts with deep thanks. He tells them that such kindness shortens winter's hardest distances. You return outside and notice a woman clad in a heavy cloak, trimmed with fur, standing slightly apart from the others. She watches the village with a cautious, observant gaze. When you approach, she introduces herself as a healer seeking rare winter herbs. She travels only when the cold is at its strongest, believing certain plants reveal their true properties only beneath deep frost. Her voice carries an air of quiet certainty that invites respect. The healer shows you a small bundle of dried stems tied with twine. She plans to trade them for local supplies. Her fingers move with delicate precision as she unties the bundle to reveal tiny silver flecks of frost that cling to the herbs. She insists the frost marks the plants as potent, though she admits their exact qualities vary depending on where they were found. The day wanes as the sun drifts behind a veil of charcoal clouds. Faint pink light streaks the sky before fading into muted blue. Travellers and villagers gather inside cottages, forming small circles around hearths. They exchange stories, goods, laughter, and a shared sense of relief at reaching safety before darkness falls. Even the most seasoned wanderer looks grateful to sit by a warm fire. Outside, the wind begins to stir again, brushing across the rooftops and carrying faint hints of frost. You step into the cold and glance toward the horizon. The footprints left by the travellers already begin to soften in the snow, half erased by the rising wind. Visitors may be rare in winter, but their arrival leaves a lasting impression. They bring novelty, connection, and a reminder that the world still moves beyond the frozen boundaries of the village. Their presence lifts spirits and sharpens awareness, carving a brief path of wonder through the season's heavy stillness. As night settles fully, you return toward the warm glow of the hearths, knowing that tomorrow the village will awaken to stories carried from distant places, woven into the rhythm of winter life. The evening drapes itself across the village in layers of blue and gold as lanterns flicker to life, one by one. Snow softens underfoot, no longer crisp from morning frost, but gently settling, as if the day's weight has finally eased. A faint glow leaks from door frames and shutter cracks, suggesting hearths burning steadily within. As you walk, you feel the air shift from biting cold to a gentler chill, softened by the warmth that humans create when they choose to gather, laugh, and hold on to the tender parts of life. Near the communal green, a group of villagers assembles around a table set with simple wooden cups. They pass a jug of warm spiced drink from hand to hand. Each person takes a small sip, exhaling slowly, as the heat spreads through their chests. The aroma carries hints of dried fruit and herbs, drifting upward like a memory of summer preserved in liquid form. Someone makes a toast to brighter mornings ahead, and the group answers with quiet laughter. Children dart between adults, leaving tracks across the fresh snow. One child holds a small clay whistle shaped like a bird. She blows gently, producing a soft trill that echoes across the green. The sound feels delicate, as though it might shatter if the wind grew too strong, yet it lifts the mood instantly. A pair of boys respond by clacking sticks together in a rhythmic pattern, turning the moment into an impromptu winter melody. By tracing the thermal discoloration on long-abandoned clay cooklids discovered in collapsed cottages, analysts recognized that families sometimes reheated fragrant drinks, not for nourishment, but deliberately to create moments of warmth that eased the strain of prolonged cold. The practice suggests that comfort held a tangible place within winter routines. You continue walking, drawn by the sound of voices singing from within a nearby house. The tune is soft and steady, carried by a small chorus of women. They sit close together, each holding a piece of embroidery illuminated by warm candlelight. Their needles glint as they move in synchronized rhythm, stitching patterns they have known since childhood. Every so often, they pause to share a story, a recollection, or a gentle tease that sparks an eruption of quiet laughter. A man steps outside carrying a pot of stew and places it on a wide stone ledge until it cools. Steam rises in slow, persistent ribbons. He wipes his brow, though the air is cold enough to sting his skin. He tells you the stew will be shared among 3 households tonight because one family had trouble keeping their fire strong during the last storm. Sharing, he insists, makes the season lighter. Attempts to compare the emotional customs of winter households across scattered diaries reveal wildly inconsistent rhythms, since the writers emphasize different aspects of joy and hardship depending on their household's fortunes. are leaving no fixed template for how communities uplifted themselves from year to year. A young couple sits beneath a snow-laden tree, bundled beneath a heavy blanket. They whisper to one another, exchanging smiles that carry the warmth of a hearth. At their feet lies a carved wooden token, shaped like a small star. The couple explains that every winter they carve a new token together to mark the moment when they finally feel the season's weight turn from overwhelming to manageable. This year's design, they say, symbolizes endurance. Nearby, an older man teaches a group of children how to shape snow blocks into a short wall. The children squeal each time the block crumbles, but he chuckles and shows them how to pack it more tightly. Eventually, they build a half circle that shields them from the wind, creating a small alcove where they can sit and share a handful of dried berries. The sweetness brightens their faces instantly. A lamplighter's scribbled margin note found on a smoke-stained manuscript once joked that winter spirits could not approach a house where at least 3 people laughed before bedtime. Villagers smile when they hear the line, and some deliberately try to outdo each other in inventing new reasons for laughter. You reach the edge of the village where the fields stretch outward beneath moonlight. A group of young adults gathers here, carrying small lanterns with coloured glass panes. They place the lanterns in a row along the snow, creating a trail of glowing reds, yellows, and greens. The lights shimmer, reflected in the frost, like scattered jewels. The group walks the lantern path, slowly savouring its quiet beauty. In another home, a grandmother tells a story to her grandchildren. She uses shadows cast by the fire to animate the tale, forming silhouettes of animals, spirits, and winter guardians with her hands. The children watch in awe, their faces illuminated by the flames. Every so often, one child bursts into delighted giggles when a shadow twitches unexpectedly. Elsewhere, you see neighbours helping a family rebuild a collapsed woodpile. They work quickly, passing logs hand to hand, forming a human chain that transforms the chore into a small celebration. Someone sings a quick winter verse to set a rhythm, and soon voices join in from every direction. Inside a cottage near the end of the lane, an elderly man polishes a tiny metal charm shaped like a winter sun. He tells you it belonged to his mother, who believed the charm captured the memory of every warm day she experienced. He lifts it to the light, and the metal glints faintly. The gesture feels intimate, a conversation between past and present, sustained through ritual. As the evening deepens, the village glows with a soft constellation of lanterns, candles, and hearth fires. Every doorway seems to hold a small piece of joy, a shared story, a warm drink, a playful song, a moment of closeness. You feel the cold recede, not because the temperature rises, but because people create warmth where winter tries to press inward. These scattered sparks of happiness gather into something larger than themselves. They weave a blanket of quiet comfort across the village, carrying everyone gently through the night. The night settles fully across the village, but instead of slowing down, a quiet industriousness begins to thread through the lanes. Winter is far from over, yet villagers already think beyond the present cold. You sense it in the way people speak to one another, with gentle foresight, in the way tools are stored carefully rather than hastily, and in the way small decisions reveal the seeds of next year's survival. Preparation is not a season of its own. It is a continuous rhythm woven into every task. You follow a group of villagers toward a long shed lit by several oil lamps. Inside, they sort through coils of rope tools, with worn handles and baskets weakened from months of use. Each item is examined, repaired, or set aside for materials that will be repurposed. A man tightens the binding of an axe head, using dried plant fibers softened in warm water. Beside him, a woman oils a wooden bucket, her hands steady and patient. Their voices rise softly, discussing what might be needed once the next year's frost returns. From the frost-etched indentations found along the bases of historical grain silos, researchers inferred that communities consistently adjusted their storage designs after each winter, adapting their methods based on which portions had resisted cold most effectively. The villagers' meticulous review of every tool and container echoes that process of seasonal learning. Outside, a pair of women gather seeds saved from autumn. They hold the small bundles close tied with twine and marked with symbols that reflect the household that harvested them. Even though planting lies months away, they review their stores carefully, confirming which crops fared best in the previous year. The seeds are placed inside clay jars, lined with parchment, then stored deep within the cellar where temperature remains steady. Children assist by collecting kindling from the edges of the village. They stack it neatly for future use, each piece sorted according to size. The older children teach the younger ones how to identify wood that burns slowly versus wood that ignites quickly. Their lessons are simple but vital, passed down across countless winters. The children listen attentively, warming their hands between tasks. Attempts to reconstruct the exact timing of winter preparations from scattered regional records remain inconclusive because different communities inserted planning moments into their routines at irregular intervals, influenced by weather shifts, labour availability, and cultural tendencies that changed over generations. A group of elders gathers near a bench beneath a large tree whose branches sag beneath heavy snow. They speak with quiet authority, recalling winters that were harsher than this one. Their voices rise and fall in low rhythms as they advise younger villagers about storing water more safely or reinforcing beams against snow load. Stories of past storms mingle with practical guidance. Younger listeners nod, taking in every detail. Near one cottage, a young man sharpens a blade with slow, even strokes. He works with discipline, the rasping sound of metal against stone echoing through the cold air. He says that sharpening tools in late winter keeps them from rusting and ensures they serve efficiently once the thaw begins. His uncle, standing nearby, mends a fishing net, explaining that some tasks are better done now rather than during the busy warmth of spring. Inside another home, a woman records her household's winter lessons in a small notebook. Her writing instrument scratches softly across the page as she lists what foods lasted well, which storage methods failed, and which chores consumed the most effort. She pauses to warm her fingers by the fire, then resumes, determined not to let the season's hard-earned knowledge slip away. A frost watcher's chant, once murmured during late-season gatherings, suggested that any village who reviewed their year with honesty would welcome the next winter with fewer sorrows. The chant feels like a gentle reminder that preparation is a form of hope. You continue toward the edge of the village where firewood stores sit under a broad shelter. Several villagers move logs from one stack to another, reorganizing them by size, dryness, and purpose. They discuss how many cords were used so far, estimating how much more is needed to stabilize homes through the remaining cold weeks. A man marks tallies onto a wooden board, his fingers turning pale as he works in the open air. Inside a small garden plot, two women examine the remnants of last year's herbs. Though snow covers most of the soil, stalks and dried stems peek through. They discuss which herbs survived longest and which should be cultivated again. Their conversation flows between memory and intention, each decision a seed planted in the mind long before it returns to the earth. Walking farther, you encounter a group of villagers weaving new baskets to replace those that cracked under winter stress. They sit close to a brazier, warming their hands between weaving motions. Their baskets grow slowly, shaped by steady fingers and shared stories. One weaver hums a slow song, its rhythm guiding her motions. The scent of warmed wicker fills the air. At the center of the village, a man repairs a shutter that warped under frost. He adjusts the metal hinge, tightens a wooden brace, and seals a gap using a strip of wool. His movements reflect more than maintenance. They reflect anticipation, a kind of quiet rehearsal for winters yet to come. Children practice carrying small bundles of straw from one shed to another. Their parents encourage them, explaining that winter chores require strong arms and steady attention. Each child beams with pride when an adult nods approvingly. Even play becomes training for future seasons. As the evening deepens, villagers gather to share observations about the current winter. They speak of the storms that came early, the frost patterns that lasted longer, and the food stores that held stronger than expected. The discussion carries a mixture of relief and caution. Winter has taught them lessons, and they are already preparing to apply them. You stand in the quiet glow of torchlight, watching the rhythm of preparation unfold. Every repaired tool, every bundle of seeds, every shared memory becomes part of a larger tapestry. Winter is not simply endured, it is studied, respected, and used as a guide for what must be done next. The villagers move through the cold with deliberate grace, embodying the understanding that preparation is not a burden but a promise that when winter returns, they will not face it unready. Christmas night settles over the village like a soft blanket of muted silver. The snow reflects faint starlight, and the air carries a calm that feels different from any other evening you have walked through. The cold persists, but it no longer bites. Instead, it seems to pause, giving everyone a brief moment of gentleness before winter resumes its full pressure in the coming days. You move slowly down the main path, listening to the quiet that fills the space between cottages. Lanterns glow warmly from windows, their light shimmering through panes touched by frost. A few villagers stand outside, adjusting their cloaks or brushing snow from the steps before guests arrive. The sound of footsteps grows gradually as families converge at the small hall near the village centre. Its wooden door stands open, revealing soft candlelight and the gentle hum of conversation. You follow the crowd inside. The hall feels warmer than any place you have entered this season. Straw mats line the floor, wool blankets rest in piles near the walls, and a long table holds bowls of broth, preserved fruits, and freshly baked bread, rationed from carefully saved flour. A few musicians sit near the corner with simple instruments. One plucks a stringed piece that emits a clear, soothing tone. Another taps rhythmically on a wooden drum warmed near the fire. From the frieze-layered mineral stains discovered inside ancient stone basins linked to winter gatherings, analysts noted that communities often warmed water not only for cooking or comfort, but to humidify halls where people met during long cold nights. This points to how carefully villagers shaped their spaces to shield each other from the season's severity. Villagers take their seats gradually. Children curl beside parents, leaning into shared blankets. Elders settle near the fire, their eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The smell of herbs drifts through the room as someone pours hot broth into wooden cups. Conversations lower to soft murmurs weaving through the hall like threads of calm. You hear a faint discussion between two women about the meaning of this night. One calls it a pause between hardships. The other calls it a quiet threshold where hope gathers. Neither claims certainty. The night means different things to each person, here shaped by memory, belief, and the simple desire to feel connected in the middle of winter. Attempts to align Christmas night customs across scattered winter testimonies reveal little uniformity, since each community infused the evening with meanings tied to their own shelter struggles and small victories. The result is a mosaic rather than a single, traceable tradition. Near the musicians, a group of children begins arranging candles in a circle. They light each flame carefully, treating the moment as if it were sacred, even though they giggle between breaths. An elder joins them and guides their hands, showing them how to shield each candle from drafts using curved pieces of bark. When all candles are lit, the glow forms a soft radiance that fills the hall with a sense of gentle promise. A man steps forward to tell a story. His voice is steady and warm as he recounts a tale of a wanderer who once visited during a winter far colder than this one. According to the story, the wanderer carried a small wooden box that glowed faintly whenever someone offered kindness. Whether the tale holds truth or imagination does not matter. It evokes quiet smiles and thoughtful glances among those listening. A snow geomancer's verse once scratched into the underside of a travel chest claimed that winter's strength breaks only when shared warmth outnumbers the shadows. Whether the villagers know this line or not, the hall tonight embodies its spirit. You shift closer to the hearth and feel the heat seep through your layers. The crackle of burning wood mixes with the soft music and murmured conversation. A platter of small pastries passes from hand to hand, each person taking only one, so the tray lasts through the night. The pastry fills your senses with sweetness and spice, a fleeting reminder that even winter allows moments of indulgence. Outside, the wind stirs lightly, brushing loose flakes of snow against the hall's outer wall. Inside, people lean closer together. Someone begins to hum an old melody, and others join in slowly. The tune flows gently, rising and falling like a tide of comfort. No single voice dominates. Instead, the melody feels collective, a shared offering to the quiet surrounding the village. A young couple exchanges small gifts near the doorway. One presents a carved wooden charm shaped like an evergreen branch. The other hands over a simple wool wristband they wove earlier that day. Their gestures are modest, yet they glow with meaning. Christmas here does not glitter with extravagance. It glimmers through softness, gratitude, and presence. As the night deepens, the hall grows still. Some children fall asleep against their parents. Elders close their eyes, listening to the last notes of the musicians. The fire burns low, but the warmth it provides spreads easily through the room. You look around, noticing how winter's harshness has carved a gathering that feels like a heartbeat. It pulses slowly, steadily, reminding everyone that endurance comes not only from preparation, but from moments when people choose to be gentle with one another. Eventually, the candles begin to burn low. Villagers rise quietly, careful not to wake sleeping children. People exchange soft farewells, offering blessings for the remaining winter weeks. When you step outside, the sky glitters with stars sharp enough to feel close. The air is cold, but your breath holds warmth from the hall. Christmas night becomes a soft anchor in the season, a rare point of stillness that carries strength far beyond its quiet hours. You pause for a long moment, letting the silence settle. Then you walk toward the sleeping village, feeling the glow remain with every step. As the long narration begins to settle into your thoughts, you step back from the village paths and let the winter night widen into a peaceful expanse around you. The snow stretches outward in smooth pale waves, and the lights behind you fade into soft glimmers that flicker only faintly through drifting frost. Each breath you draw moves slowly, now warmer than the one before, as though the entire season has loosened its hold just enough for you to rest. The cold no longer presses sharply. Instead, it quiets itself into something gentle, something steady, something that feels almost like a soft hand resting against your shoulder. You listen to the faint whisper of the wind, a soft ribbon of sound weaving through the dark. It passes by without hurry, carrying with it the subtle scent of wood smoke from distant hearths. With every step, your mind drifts through the memories of the village, the glow of lanterns, the hum of shared songs, the warmth of fires that pushed winter back, one calm breath at a time. All of those small human sparks linger within you now. They dim slowly, comfortably, the way embers settle into a hearth at the end of a long night. You let your shoulders relax. Your breathing softens. The snow beneath your feet seems to cradle each step, and the world grows quieter still, as though it too wishes to sleep. The cold no longer feels like something to resist. It feels like part of the rhythm, part of the stillness, part of the deep winter night that asks nothing of you but rest. So let the quiet gather around you, let the warmth you carry remain, and let your thoughts drift softly into sleep. Sweet dreams.